Under 32 hours from the NBA draft. Jimmy Cook, Scott Agnes, Eddie Garrison behind the ones and twos. Happy Wednesday to you here on The Fan. The tension is finally getting palpable a bit. 62 pre-draft workouts for the Indiana Pacers. Scott Agnes of The Fan and of Fieldhouse Files was a part of the media portion of many of those workouts. And Scott, why I'm so excited we're able to have you in here today, and why we're also going to have you here on Monday for rapid reaction to everything NBA draft, is to get those insights and observations. We'll cover a lot of ground in this first segment and throughout the show, including the local ties like Trayce Jackson-Davis, like Jalen Hood-Schifino. But I want to begin first right out of the gate with the question on everybody's mind, and you don't have this answer just yet, but I have no doubt that you will the closer we get to the draft, which is that seventh pick, and as it continues to be an enticing point of conversation for where the Pacers go. If they decide to trade and get that set it and forget it starter, find their wing answer, and not worry about rookie development necessarily, or if there's somebody that truly has caught their eye. While we await that answer, from your observations, from your conversation, was there somebody off the bat in these pre-draft workouts that you look at and you say, yeah, that's an Indiana Pacer, that fits what Kevin Pritchard, what Rick Carlisle are trying to build here? Not necessarily from the workouts or the glimmers of it you were able to see, but just from the conversations, the one-on-ones you had. Yeah, because one misnomer, I think, and by the way, good to see Jimmy and you as well, Eddie, here, is that we're in on these workouts and we get to observe. No, not at all. Right. At best, we'll see Rick when he pulls a guy aside afterwards, or a player like Trayce wants to get more shots up along the perimeter, and I think that was probably a little bit by design with 19 media members there. By far, Jimmy, more media members that were at any Pacers practice or any Pacers game, I think, this season. But afterwards, let me show that I can knock down that three-pointer. Otherwise, it's all entirely just seeing them interact with team executives and scouts afterward. A lot of them. See, I love this time, Jimmy, because they're not jaded yet, and they're still green. Sure. And so they're coming along. They're going down the line of executives and scouts. Let's call it 25 different individuals, shaking every one of their hands, most of them, and looking them in the eye. They meet Chrissy, one of the PR people. Hey, I'm Grady. Nice to meet you. Here, we'll take you over here to PR. And then they go along to the few media members that are there and introduce themselves. And so it's a fun experience, and I don't take it for granted as well, because the other thing I think fans should know is it's not like this most places. Most teams don't even announce who they bring in. None of that. So it's all about talking with agents, talking with team officials to try to get a sense of who they've brought in, who looked good, that sort of thing. Now, for us, the guy I've said for several weeks now, and I'm staying with, that if he's available at 7, I would go Jarace Walker. That's who I like the most. I think he'll probably be best available there, unless you're really taking a reach on a guy that's, raw athleticism, hadn't shown a ton, much like we saw with like a Giannis, right? In mid-teens, where it's like, this could be a project, high upside, or there's nothing here. I think we already have seen a lot from Jarace Walker. I love his versatility. I love his defense, how he's more of a 4 than a 3, but can also slide down and defend 2s. An incredible rebounder as well, and defense and rebounding, as we've seen for the last several years at least. That's what they got to improve upon. So for me, based on how we expect everything to go, Jarace Walker is my number one guy. Go ahead. I was going to say, I really like Jarace Walker. I do, and I think he would fit a clear need for this team. The only knock on him, just from nationally and from his scouting report, is the three-point shooting percentage leaves a little bit to be desired. The free throw shooting percentage is fine, but again, it's those air markers of where you're trying to judge a freshman on what he can become at the next level. Is that fixable? Is it developable? Because if it's not, and you look at where Jarace Walker would likely line up with this team, what I don't want to have happen is somebody with size that you're putting at the 3 or 4 that would convolute things to a point that you don't have the type of floor spacers that you need. When you've talked to either those within the front office or you've talked to people nationally about Jarace Walker, is that a real concern, or is it like every scouting report, you're going to have your pros and you need some weaknesses to fill the content? Is that a legitimate concern of if he can add a consistent three-point jumper to his game? Not quite the point of Trayce Jackson-Davis where he didn't take them, But
we didn't even get an opportunity to see those.
Right. You have at least a sample size on Walker to look at.
Right. No, I don't think there's any great concern like this is a red flag. Right. It's definitely not one of his pros.
Right.
I think he's shown the ability to shoot it. That's one of the things he's tried to highlight during these workouts, and I think he finished with about 6 workouts. I know Taylor Hendricks had 6 workouts, including with the Pacers. He's another reasonable choice for the team at 7. He scares me a little bit in that he had this huge jump in one season.
Yeah.
And so is there more jumps coming, or is this who he is? And it's crazy. The thing I laugh about going to these workouts, Jimmy, is we get a list of who's participating, some stats as well, and it includes their birthday. And it's a real reality check when you see these guys. Grady Dick, I'm looking at now. November 2003. These guys didn't even experience Y2K. There's very few, Jimmy, that are even in the 90s.
Well, so you've been covering the Pacers in some capacity for the better part of, 12 years now?
Yeah, this will be my 12th season, but even back with internships, right. I was covering the draft 4 years before that.
So you're just really walking into, like myself and Eddie are to some extent, of the shell shock of seeing a birthday that surprises you, right? There's a lot of people in this market that, in general, when you cover sports, eventually that moment hits you, and the fastest opportunity for it to arrive is in these pre-draft workouts where you look at it and you're like, oh, man, 2003, 2004, this is
because
crazy.
Who are all these elite prospects that are likely available at 7 for the Pacers? Well, it's generally first year, one-and-done guys. It's 19-year-olds. There's even an 18. G.G. Jackson, youngest guy in all of this. And I'll tell you what, from these draft workouts, he did a really interesting thing that I assume was by design from conversations with his close people, his agents, etc. And Jimmy, he admitted his errors. He humbled himself and acknowledged, hey, I went on Instagram Live, said things about my team. I learned stuff. Hey, I disrespected my coach a couple times. I learned from that. This dude's 18. So you're going to expect that. Like, imagine yourself, right, at 18, and if you were the top prospect, where you're coming from. So rather than avoiding that or, I've moved past that, let's not talk about that, he hit that head on. So he's the guy for me, for example, really interested in if they do end up keeping some of those late first-round picks or pick 32. I don't expect for them to keep them all, but someone like him, I could see them taking one guy, very raw, very big upside, going to need a couple of years because they, ahead of that, will have already taken and have the core that they're building for. But one last point as we kind of set the stage for all of this that I want to emphasize once more. This is the 3rd straight year where the Pacers have been part of the lottery.
Yeah.
Chris Duarte a couple of years ago. Benedict Mathurin last year. Good draft picks. Both very good. Mathurin has already become, I think, a pillar along with Halliburton for what this franchise is going to be. They'll draft at 7 or potentially trade it. I don't think that'll be the case, but we'll see. Most of that stuff gets further down the road tomorrow, even if it happens. But assuming they take that pick, then hopefully that's it for a decade. Hopefully we're not talking about the Pacers in the lottery until 2032 or something, which sounds astronomical. Sounds right. as crazy as 1999 players born in 2003. But I think it's important to now shift our expectations that this is not the cute, fun team. This is not, we'll see. Over under 24.5. No, none of that. To me, and I'm not talking expectations in terms of can they get the play in? Can they get the 8 seed? To me, I think they should very much be in play, bearing injuries, for 5th, 6th in the East. Now, it's very early to talk about it because we don't know how the rosters have shaped up. But that's one important point that I want to stress here going in because we need to reset the expectations and now, after this, hold the Pacers accountable.
There's obviously always a sense of urgency in that front office to be a competitive team, to put together a product that has an opportunity to contend for playoffs and be able to be a threat within the Eastern Conference. And that's not something they've been able to do, clearly, in the last couple of years with their time spent in the lottery. Is there a real sense of urgency with this draft because of that desire to get back? Not just that, hey, we're trying to build something special here and we're trying to one day get back there, but is there a sense of urgency to get there 12 months' time? Like, that's a legit conversation within that building of playing, no, that's not what we want. We want to be a real threat within the Eastern Conference a year from now?
Yes, I agree with that point. And a year from now is when you hope this team then becomes a contender. I think next year is about allowing guys like Tyrese Halliburton to experience the playoffs for the first time. It's his fourth year. One thing that could happen coming up, after the draft and leading into free agency is Halliburton and the Pacers could agree to a contract extension. Presumably, it would be a max deal. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. But to have him locked down for the future and such moving forward. But this year is about getting back into the fold, being part of the conversation. Quite honestly, Jimmy, being relevant again beyond this market. I think that's critical. Then, with Matherin with 2 years under his belt, the 7th pick, Andrew Nembhard a couple of years under his belt, Halliburton 2 full seasons of being the guy, hopefully being healthy and leading a team. Maybe Buddy Hield's still here, and I wouldn't rule that out. He experiencing the playoffs for the first time. He's a guy now in his 30s, has the longest drought of any player who hasn't reached the postseason. I would love nothing more than for him to experience that. So in 1 year from now, I think we're probably talking about the Pacers again, Jimmy, drafting 18th. Oh, now we're throwing that out. 18th
right, it's just hypothetical.
No. 18th is curse for the Pacers. TJ Leaf. We're not talking. No. So they're going to draft 17th or 19th.
Sure.
And this is coming after at least a first-round playoff appearance, and that propels them forward to then hopefully be a contender in the Eastern Conference.
The other conversation around the league right now is what's going to happen with 2 and 3. What are Charlotte and what are Portland going to do in terms of they're trying to trade back, if they're trying to make a true selection there? The Trailblazers have a decision to make with Damian Lillard. He's mentioned that at least the rumblings have been he doesn't want to be a part of another rebuild in Portland, which, again, Dame's one of my favorite players in the league. I wish he would have had this realization 5 years ago, but hey, whatever. Money's great, and Portland's taken very good care of him. What are the ripple effects if a trade occurs with 2 to 3 at all to the Pacers? Because we tried to find some ripples after the Suns made their deal to go get Bradley Beal, and it wasn't as far widely felt immediately. But obviously, if Portland makes a move with Damian Lillard and they keep the pick, okay, that doesn't do much. But if they move the pick elsewhere, where are the ripples that potentially occur if there is movement at 2 to 3 in your mind?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. We know what 1 is. I think that'll be special and we'll enjoy to watch that. But this is why I wanted to have Sean Highkin coming up at 2 o'clock. And by the way, Danny Lopez at 12:30 we'll talk over with the Pacers and the NBA All-Star Host Committee. As we now know, All-Star Saturday night coming up in February. We'll be hosted at Lucas Oil Stadium and much more reasonable ticket prices. And then coming up, Rafael Barlowe to discuss the draft at 1 o'clock. To your question, Jimmy. First of all, at 2, Charlotte, I think they are split. They don't know what they're doing, and I believe that from people I've talked with. They see the pros and cons of going both routes. I think they're more enamored with Scoot Henderson, but they see the highs of Brandon Miller. They see the value in wings more than guards. But Scoot, I think we know what he could become at minimum. We don't know that just yet from Brandon Miller. There's also, fair or not, that's a little bit of a checkered past of things that even if he was an active participant in driving the car down at Alabama, he was there. 2 a.m., shootings that took place, and I think he's mostly been clear to that. But that's questions he's answered every single time he talks, either with the media and certainly with teams. I think the big X factor in all this, to start for both of those teams, is where is New Orleans with Zion Williamson? Because I think for the first time, Jimmy, I think it is real too, that Zion, for the right price, can be had. And that's where things get really interesting. Because if he was healthy, every team in the league would want him. But he, too, right now, has some things going on off the court that I don't think we need to get into.
Yeah.
On the court, he can't get there because he's not healthy. He's been perpetually overweight in terms of trying to be on the floor and have a successful career. He's also a big guy, and you worry about lower extremities, feet, knees, issues like that. We saw them dismiss an assistant coach he was most close with in Teresa Weatherspoon here this week. I don't know direct knowledge of that situation, but I could see something like, hey, if Zion's not going to be here, I don't want to be here either. And you've blocked me from previous other opportunities elsewhere, set me free. And so they did. I think New Orleans, along with Portland and Charlotte, have big decisions to make here. It starts with Charlotte, and do they want Scoot? Do they want Brandon? Or do they deal that pick and get involved with New Orleans and try to restart with Zion, who's in Jordan brand, by the way, and Michael Jordan, while he'll
still have a minority share.
He is selling the franchise. He's also retaining a minority portion. I think that's also good for him and good for the league as well. But he's in Charlotte right now. They put Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson through workouts. They also have several other decisions to make. They expect to have Miles Bridges back this year after missing all of last year. I think he still has to sit out a handful of games, a little shortened suspension, I think, in my mind. I think 10 more games left after they gave him 20, even though he wasn't signed to a team last year. That's a different conversation. But does Charlotte kind of rebuild and restart? Do they make this draft pick? Do they try to rebuild on the fly with Zion Williamson? It is all so interesting. And so, again, we'll talk with Sean Highkin, who's on the Portland Trailblazers beat, coming up at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And he wrote last night, I forwarded it to you, this is the biggest pivot point, biggest mark right now in Portland Trailblazers history, and that says a lot.
It does say a lot, and we've said similar sentiment to some extent about the Pacers the last couple of years, because you need to be perfect in these drafts to get to where they want to go as quickly as they want to go, right? If you miss on 7, if that's a clear, just right out of the gate miss, I'm not saying long-term it's a flop, but like if you take somebody like Jarris Walker and there were injuries unforeseen during the season and it derails things, that's not necessarily a mark on the front office, but it is something that holds you back and doesn't get you where you want to go. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. There's no injury concerns with Jarris Walker, but there's pressure within the Pacers to get this right, to be in the position that you and I have talked about, that many have talked about on these airways, of being out of the lottery. Speaking of that 7th pick, I'm going to throw out the hypothetical that I've been throwing out the last couple of days. Again, This isn't something I think is going to happen, but the connection to him has been there since the deadline. OG Anunoby's availability will always be talked about while the Pacers have the ability to make trades, because they at least inquired, or it was reported they inquired and offered somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 first-round picks at the deadline to try to make a deal get done. At least that was what the rumor mills said. Pacers obviously don't comment on trades that don't happen.
No.
But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that was the asking price from Toronto at the deadline, was 3 first-rounders for OG Anunoby.
It was higher.
It's higher than that. Okay.
That was the starting point.
Give me.
I can tell you that.
Give me a what the asking price probably was. Or we just
5 first-round picks.
Okay. Has that gone down now with where Toronto is, or do you think it's still in the neighborhood of a 3 to 5 first-rounder if they're moving OG Anunoby?
I think, Jimmy, right now, Toronto's the most complicated in terms of gathering where they are at. I'm not sure if they have clarity on that just yet, and I hope so, because we're what, 35 hours from the draft? They better have some clarity.
And they have 2 players that they're rumored to maybe trade in, Siakam or Anunoby.
Exactly. Pascal Siakam down in Orlando training in the offseason. He's got a place down there. I think it would be interesting to see them move him and or OG Anunoby. We saw Gary Trent Jr. opt in.
By the way, that's one I was going to bring up at some point. Is that a good measuring stick for where the market is for Gary Trent Jr. to opt in instead of trying to find more money elsewhere?
Yeah, that tells us, between mostly with him and his agent, and they recognize that's where they're at right now. And maybe he could get slightly more, but it's probably not worth the risk.
Yeah.
And that's a good contract right there to finish it out. So get this, have one more good year. And as I think is important to say, like we've seen with Bradley Beal more than anyone, get the money first, figure out the destination second, because it almost always works out. And so, in terms of trading the pick, I think it's one of those where the Pacers are listening to everything. They're calling around. I heard as early as last Tuesday, just checking it. What's the value? What's this value of this 7th pick for? Because here's what they have to decide on.
It won't be straight up. There's going to be additional pieces that are added in.
Absolutely. At least several pieces that would have to be included.
And what are you willing to give up?
Here's the thing with that. What their consideration must be is, do you want to draft? And I think there's several wings that they would be very happy with. But are their ceiling, or what you hope that person to be? Could you get that today with a current wing that is out there? And that's what you're weighing, because there's no sure things in the draft. There's so many whiffs and misses. And so if you could get some clarity and get a sure thing and a guy that's already had success, and it wouldn't be too cost prohibitive, those are the things right now that the front office and especially, I think, Ted Wu, their cap guru over there, who, by the way, is a huge weapon for this Pacers franchise. He helped write the first CBA, the previous one.
Sure.
Now, on the negative side here, what's the NBA doing? Teams still don't have the new CBA that takes effect July 1. So that is complicated. But if you're the Pacers, you hope by having Ted Wu, someone as a direct source to the NBA, again, he was part that wrote that last CBA, would know how to maximize it, because that's why you hire someone like that. But there's so many different ways that the Pacers could go about this pick. I still think I would be willing to trade it, but not for something like 4 first-round picks, 5 first-round picks. I wouldn't. I don't think it's too much. I think it's too cost prohibitive as well to move up to go get Scoot, for example, to go get a Brandon Miller. And what I'm saying by that is I think it would take your 3 first-round picks this year and probably at least one player that's already on their roster. Chris Duarte and Isaiah Jackson. A buddy, something like that. So this is where it gets difficult, Eddie. We saw at the trade deadline, guys were getting moved for 5 second-round picks. And we saw last year at this time, Rudy Gobert went for the 5 first-round picks plus their last pick. So really 6. Like, it was incredible, the haul. And so in turn, maybe you call this inflation in the NBA, and so in turn, it's making these trades very difficult for teams to maneuver.
That's what I was about to bring up is the trade last year with Rudy Gobert for the 5 first-round picks. It's like, okay, OG Anunoby's more valuable in my eyes than a Rudy Gobert, because not only can he bring the defense like 1 through 4 because of his ability to switch and pick and roll and everything, but he's improved as a shooter and an offensive weapon. So to me, it's a bit interesting of the case that you're in if you're a team trying to acquire OG Anunoby just because of the flexibility he has on both sides of the floor. Because I think he'd be a perfect fit in Indiana, but at what price is the big question. And 4
100%.
first-round picks is way too much for my liking. I'd rather try and go sign, Cam Johnson, or maybe even try to, go to Atlanta and get DeAndre Hunter, because I know he probably is available for them. So it's a bit interesting what the Pacers can do right now. As Kevin Pritchard likes to say, optionality.
I would gladly give up 7, 26, and 29 and a first next year if it meant one of 2 things were happening. That's 4 first-rounders on the table.
Mm-hmm.
If it meant that a player of OG Anunoby's caliber was coming here, or if it meant you could move up to 2 or 3. And here's why. Because even though there's only 2 rounds to draft with in the NBA, we all know that, and the picks are a hot commodity, where I would like the Pacers to be next year is a 15 to 18 range. That's a player that is not the necessary future of the franchise. It would be a contributing piece that you want to grow and develop. If they have the utmost confidence in Scoot Henderson or in Brandon Miller, if that was an actual conversation, and it's 4 first-rounders, but 3 of them are here this year, and we're already talking about using 26 or 29 to trade up to 13,
yep,
I'm okay with it.
And I like how you did that. Once you make it real, rather than just 4 picks, when you think about it. So 26 and 29, in the grand scheme of things, not that important, not that valuable, right? How many times do we kind of laugh at a throwaway pick at 20? Let's see, maybe this player can hit the rotation and become a 7th man. That's kind of what you're hoping at minimum for a pick 2023. So you're not as much worried about 26, 29. And then you would assume, like we did, next year's first would probably be 17 to 20. Again, it's not that lottery pick. You would have a lottery protection. I think if you talk about those 4, I think it would take even more than that.
Yeah.
And more so you're talking about a known player, a guy already on the roster that fits within. And depending on the opposing team, Portland, if they're making a deal and trading away their pick,
right,
they don't want those draft picks. So you're not even talking about a package like this. Meantime, if it's Charlotte, and if you're Charlotte, I don't know why you wouldn't do you're either keeping the pick or you're getting Zion. A high franchise-altering guy if he's healthy versus, hey, let's run through this draft once again.
I will say one caveat as we go to break. We're going to have Danny Lopez, Vice President of External Affairs and Corporate Communications with your Indiana Pacers. Big announcement for them, the All-Star front. The only way that Portland deal would make sense if there's a subsequent deal to move Dame, and it's clear there's a rebuild there where they would want picks in that case because they're doing a full overhaul of the roster.
Correct.
He's Scott Agnes. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. Daniel Lopez, Vice President for External Affairs, Corporate Communications. Big news on the Pacers front. All-Star Saturday. New venue, more fan-friendly. We'll talk about that when we come back on The Fan.
7-5, The Fan.
12:30 on this Wednesday. Welcome in. This is the Fan Midday Show on 93.5, 107.5. With Jimmy Cook, I'm Scott Agnes, and let's go right to the hotline as now we're joined with Danny Lopez, Vice President for External Relations and Corporate Communications for Pacers Sports and Entertainment. And Danny, an exciting announcement earlier today. We were over at Lucas Oil Stadium with the Pacers and the All-Star Host Committee for February announcing that Lucas Oil Stadium will be the host for All-Star Saturday night. That's the three-point contest, the dunk contest, and the skills challenge. Take us through what went into that and why fans are going to be excited about the fact that even more of them can be involved next February.
Yeah, you nailed it. What's up, Scott? First and foremost, let me tell you that I think you're doing a great job on this show, man. You're killing it. So good work, and thanks for having me on to talk about this. This is really exciting. We had this great announcement. I think you saw the turnout. You were out there, so you saw the turnout. You see how everybody is excited about this. I mean, the reality is that, if you think about, you were out in Utah and you saw, and it's just not the same when you're in a building like that and, the cheapest ticket in the building is $500 or whatever. It's just not the same. We are focused on making All-Star Indy the most community-focused event that we have, the most community-centric All-Star that we can make it. And this was a big part of it. So when we started having communications with the league about it, I think, there's so much that goes into the planning of this, the logistics of the big shows that are put on over the course of that weekend. And so there was a lot that went into that decision, but ultimately we've got great partners with the NBA. They share our vision. And so everybody got on board, and here we are.
And so the All-Star game, the big one, will be over at Gainbridge Fieldhouse as expected. But with this and opening up Lucas Oil Stadium, the south end of the stadium, there will be now up 35,000 fans that will be able to attend it, and to your point too, at an affordable rate. Tickets go on sale July 24th, ranging from $24 to $49, $79. So you're exactly right. Hopefully it not only doesn't just have a corporate feel, but I know one of the big things for Rick Fuson and everyone over there, one of the hesitations in even hosting it was we want to make it ours. We want to involve as many season ticket holders and residents as we can, and having it at the Fieldhouse really makes that a difficult situation. So opening up Lucas Oil really changes that opportunity.
We do these things our way. I mean, that's the reality. We've got a unique way to do it. We want to make it distinct. We got to leave our imprint on it. This isn't a city that can or does just drop these events in here and then they come and go, and that's the end of it. We try to do these things in a very particular way with a lot of involvement. And so when we started thinking about $24 tickets and $49 tickets, $79 tickets, I mean, that's unprecedented. This has not been done for All-Star in the past. And, you hit the nail on the head as it pertains to this event in particular. If you grew up like I did in the early 80s into the 90s, this was the event. I mean, it was Neek and Jordan. It was Spud Webb. It was Larry Bird. It was the three-point contest. I mean, this was what so many people sort of associate with All-Star, and it's the memories that a lot of people have of All-Star as a kid. I certainly do, and I think a lot of people share that. And so to be able to do that with so many more members of our community that can now access it and be a part of it live in person is going to be just awesome.
Danny, this has been a 6 to 7 year process if you go back to when you guys were initially making a bid to be All-Star host to when it was announced as a site back in 2017. The schedule changes due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and now here we are with a date in 2024. How early in the process or how recently in this process did Lucas Oil Stadium become a viable option to have this event? Because I think it's really great what you guys are doing. You mentioned what this weekend means to a lot of NBA fans. I have those same memories growing up as a kid and remembering great dunk contests and three-point shootouts. It's awesome that it'll be more accessible, but when did Lucas Oil Stadium become on your radar?
Well, like I said, there's just a ton that goes into it, even coordinating with the CIB and with the folks at Lucas Oil and the city and the state to make sure that you can get in there and make this happen in that facility and that it's open and available. I mean, there's a ton that goes into that. And obviously, as you all know, the NBA's got we have just an incredible partnership with the NBA that's unique, with her being the longest standing, longest tenured owner. It's just a different relationship with the commissioner and with the team. So it is a partnership, and we're constantly having those conversations. But as you guys know, they don't really pivot their focus entirely until after the previous All-Star, and that's when we were on the clock. So I'd say around that time we started having serious conversations around, okay, well, what would this look like if we were to be able to pull this thing off? And what does that require on the league side? What does that require on our side? What would that mean for the community? Can we do things like what we're going to do, the host committee purchasing 2,400 tickets and then using our community partners to distribute them to families that otherwise would never come to Lucas Oil for an event like this? Those types of things, we started having conversations as a team. So I'd say, fairly recently we were able to really get serious and buckle down and start having these conversations.
Danny Lopez, Pacers Sports and Entertainment Corporate Communications VP, joining us to talk about All-Star Weekend, already thinking about February and how Indy will put on a show here. And I know there's things that haven't been announced yet. They're still figuring it out, but I think the thing I want to impress upon fans here is there's concerts. It's a mega weekend between the concerts, different venues that are being involved, and then finally Sunday, it all being showcased with the All-Star Game, which will be seen in 214 countries and territories, I think it is. So this is a very different way in which Indy will be in the spotlight to a global audience.
You're exactly right. This is the most international event that we're going to host here of this scale in Indianapolis. It's far more global in scale than the Super Bowl and then college football, which were great events. But this is different in the sense that, last year in Utah, you had 25 players from 17 countries that participated in the All-Star festivities over the course of that weekend. You're going to have something similar this year. You get 1,800 members of the media. A lot of them come from other places, other countries that will descend on Indianapolis. The way we're looking at it is, the basketball grew up here. The basketball stories are going to largely take care of themselves. We want to make sure that we use this as an opportunity to position Indiana as a tech leader, as a logistics leader in the Midwest. The number one school of music in the world, the number one school of engineering in the world, Notre Dame. I mean, our research universities, our research institutions that are here. This is a big global business hub, and our culinary scene is important. Our retail and music scene is important. We want to show those things off to the world. And so this is our chance to do that. We're going to be, front and center for that weekend. And we got to make sure that we put our best foot forward, and we're working collaboratively with the city and the state and all the organizations around town to do exactly that.
Danny, I love when the All-Star events happen, and Scott mentioned the concerts, but there's ways that the city is highlighted and the culture of the city are highlighted. Heck, Larry Bird delivered the bid in an IndyCar, so you already have one foot in the door in that regard. Yeah. I know you're going to keep most close to the chest, but any other wrinkles or nuggets or ways that the culture of the city will be on display throughout the weekend?
Yeah, so there will be concerts, and actually part of the announcement today was as you saw, the game itself, or the festivity, the basketball side festivities will be on the south end, and then the north end will be used, as you see from the renderings, by the NBA and by organizers in different ways. We'll have some performances, and there's more announcements to come on that. But even just downtown, and the beauty of our walkable downtown is you'll be able to get to Cambridge, or you'll be able to get into the heart of downtown and the campus easily from Lucas Oil or from any of the venues. But we'll have pop-up retail. There'll be artists on display. We're working with all of the leasing agents and the building owners around town to make sure that if there's an empty storefront, that we're using that space to get an artist in there and use it as a gallery, or get some kind of music performance thing in there, so that all those spaces are on display, truly on display for anybody that's walking our downtown. Tons more. Look, we got a long way to go, right? We got months and months before we get to February, and there's going to be a ton of announcements. But the one thing I do want to impress upon everybody is, few people actually get into the game on Sunday. And obviously, we've expanded the universe to 35,000 of folks that can ultimately get in to watch this game or these festivities on Saturday night now. But even if you're not coming to one of these events, there's going to be a fan fest like there is every year. And there's going to be other things. I mean, we want people to just descend upon downtown and walk it and be around and feel the energy and bring that to Indianapolis, because like we've talked about, this is our chance to really put the city and the state on display for the rest of the world.
I'm talking with Danny Lopez, Pacers Sports and Entertainment, and really the host committee as well for this All-Star game. One of the blessings in disguise is the fact that those $360 million in renovations to the Fieldhouse would not have been done if Indy had hosted like they were planning to 3 years ago. And so that's a whole other element in all this. You talk about the walkability of the city, but I'm picturing not tailgating, but people hanging outside the North End. There's that speakeasy, Mel's Steakhouse. Like, there's so much within this, let's call it a mile radius, that's going to be fantastic. And the one other thing we haven't touched on that's noteworthy too is throughout those 4 days, the 15th or the 18th of February, Pacers bike share, free. Indigo buses, free. So if let's say bad weather or you're just outside that mile block, it's going to be an easy way to come down and have a good few days.
It's going to be easy to get into downtown. It's going to be easy to get around downtown by bus or by foot. We want to make this as easy as possible for people to come down and enjoy the festivities. You're exactly right. If there was a silver lining with the way things played out, it's that we got to finish the Field House of the Future. And when you're doing the second largest renovation project in the history of the league, you need those times. We would have been right in the middle of the renovations for All-Star 2021. And the other silver lining, I know, Rick has talked about this a lot. The other silver lining is that we weren't going to be able to do this event the way we do events. I mean, the creative things like this just would not have been possible. We wouldn't have been able to involve, up to 400 members of a host committee to think creatively about ways that we could put the city and the state on display. And so the advantage to having a little more time and sort of things stabilizing and normalizing is that we could get back to work in the way that we always do. And we're doing exactly that. And, you referenced Commission Row, Bicentennial Unity Plaza, which we'll cut ribbon on here very soon in the coming months. So, I mean, there's a lot that wasn't in place at the time that we'll be able to leverage. And all of that means greater connectivity to the neighborhoods around downtown and hopefully people from all over the state coming downtown for the events.
So let's dive brass tacks for a second. July 24th is the date that folks need to know at this point, right? 10,500 tickets will go on sale to the public around then?
That's right. And we want to encourage folks to go to pacers.com/allstar2024 because all of the information leading up to the on sale will be on there, and there'll be instructions on the process and everything else. We want to make this sale available to Hoosiers first, so we want to encourage people to get on there and figure out what that process is going to be. But that's all of the information for All-Star will be on there too. So if people want to know how to get involved or what some of the events that are going to be that have already been announced, all of that is on that site too.
Very good, Danny. Thanks for joining us, and well done this afternoon at that press conference.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks.
That's Danny Lopez, Vice President of External Relations and Corporate Communications over at Pacer Sports and Entertainment. And it was pretty cool. They had a blow-up. Remember the Colts blow-up stick figure?
Yeah.
Well, this was like a blow-up block of the NBA logo, which is sweet, right outside, kind of nearby the Peyton Manning statue for those who've driven by or go to Colts games or whatever. And it was a big deal because the fact that Steve Simon, one of the Pacers owners, son of Herb Simon, was there. Rick Fuson, the mayor, the governor. This is significant both to the economy and for us, let's just take it selfishly, to the sports world. We may not have another All-Star weekend in our lifetimes. I thought for sure by now, Jimmy and Eddie, we would already have another Super Bowl. We're still waiting.
I've been wanting All-Star Saturday night here my entire life. I will be a part of that event in some capacity. I can't wait to get a ticket. Again, July 24th is when those are going to go on sale, because even though the All-Star game sometimes gets poo-pooed, I will say the effort intensity the last couple of years I thought has been better than years past. But again, I know where the bar was, and I know that it's not for everybody. But All-Star Saturday night is always electric. I remember just getting together with buddies, watching on TV, high school and college years, and to be able to be there in person, but not only be there in person, have it in our own backyard is phenomenal. The idea of putting it in Lucas Oil Stadium and having it more accessible to everybody, equally as cool. And now it's a countdown to those little nuggets that'll be passed out on how the city's going to be represented, what type of unique aspects are going to be there. Lots already in there on Pacers.com. In the press release.
And Fieldhouse Files.
And Fieldhouse Files.
Come on now.
Of course. a lot of first-hand accounts from our own Scott Agnes. But yeah, I mean, it's for us, it's been a lifetime. And for Pacers fans, it's been a lifetime to some extent if you're in our gap of age. But for this organization, it's been 6 years trying to get this thing finalized with the COVID-19 pandemic complicating things, with hosting March Madness in 2021, which again was phenomenal, and it was a great opportunity for the city. But yeah, to bump that back, it did act as a blessing in some regard to open up a lot of amenities you highlighted that wouldn't have been there, like the plaza that's currently under works right now.
And there's some context here as well. The new attendance number at Gainbridge Fieldhouse is 17,000. Remember, they cut out one of the ends for performances. TNT has a big old set. There's thousands. I forget the official number. There's thousands of media there. Mm-hmm. So let's rough it. So let's go from 17,000 to maybe 14,000 sold seats for the All-Star game. And that would be Saturday night and Friday if that's where it was held. Instead, it's more than doubling that attendance. And so the real allure of this is the fact that locals can actually be involved in this. Because otherwise, quite honestly, Jimmy, they're shut out. They have no chance. I've had season ticket holders already hit me up trying to, how do I get tickets? Quite honestly, if I wanted to buy tickets, I'm not sure how I would get. That's how scarce these tickets are. And then on top of that, being at an affordable rate. Now, from an event standpoint, I'll be curious to see two things. First, in talking about Saturday night, three-point shootout was way more impressive and eye-popping than the dunk contest. The dunk contest has traditionally owned that night.
Yeah.
And then secondly, once you talk about being at the Fieldhouse Sunday for the All-Star game, what will it look like, both in terms of effort and format? Because already, I think it was a couple weeks ago, Adam Silver hinting at the fact that maybe they'll shake it up a little bit, and instead of that draft that we all wanted to see, and I thought it went okay, but it was also funny, the fact that your MVP, Nikola Jokic, I think was drafted second to last. Now, there's reasons behind that, especially those foreign players. Luka, more than anyone, just watch his body language. He does not want to be there. Has zero interest. A guy like Jimmy Butler, I don't think, has any interest in being there. But one thing they're considering here is making it, once you have your players involved in the game, then splitting it up because you have enough now, world versus U.S. And that, too, would be interesting. Joel Embiid, Giannis, Jokic, etc. on one team, and LeBron, Steph, and others on representing the U.S. team. They're trying to find a magic spark. It starts with the guys caring more and putting up a little bit of a fight defensively.
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, though, you've tried to incentivize it. You involve charities, you've involved bonuses, you've involved as much as you can. I don't hate the idea of changing it to a U.S. versus world format if that's the way they wanted to go, but there's also a time and a place where at some point the defense is never coming back to the level they want it to for the entire stretch of a game. It gets locked and tight in the fourth quarter with the Elam ending in there, but at some point you know what you're buying into. I'm not mad at an offensive slugfest. I know some NBA purists want to see the lockdown defense, but I've accepted it, and it still can be exciting and fun.
Here's my thing. I just want to see him put up a fight.
Sure.
I'm not trying to see a lockdown defense or anything like that.
Right.
But to stand at the elbow.
There's a balance.
And watch the guy blow past you and then run to the other end. That's not basketball. That's not what we accept here in Indiana.
Sure.
No, thank you. But that will be a good time coming up on Saturday. So I appreciate Danny Lopez joining us to talk about that. Again, if you want to read more, already posted a story at fieldhousefiles.com. Let's take a break, come back, more draft discussion. It's going to be a lot of that here leading up to the draft tomorrow night. Probably it'll be like 8:30 p.m. by the time Victor Wembanyama shakes the hand of Adam Silver to get things started. And then that's truly when things get started. Let's talk about what might happen after Victor and a lot more after this as you're listening to the Fan Midday Show on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
105.5 The Fan.
The NBA draft tomorrow night at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. I went last year, Jimmy. It was a fun experience, something I was glad I really did once. The challenge is so much of that world is on our phones and on Twitter and not the TV product or there in the venue, that part of me did feel a little bit disconnected from that experience. What made it valuable, though, I will say, is afterward going down to event level, seeing Benedict Mather and getting to see him and talk with him, Kendall Brown, Andrew Nimhart, I don't think was there if I remember right, and but it's a cool experience, and it's honestly, I was thinking about this last night. If I'm Trace Jackson Davis, where you're a fringe first round guy, early second round guy, so you know you're going to be drafted, is my point.
Yeah.
I'd have a hard time not going. You're never going to go again where you are actively involved. The thing is, I will say there is a lot to value where you could be with your friends and family. You can be either, in a good environment or here in Indianapolis with those that matter versus, 5 people. I think now those in the green room are allowed to bring 10 people to the draft. I see it both ways. I think I would lean, quite honestly, of being there and experience it my one time.
Yeah, I would probably go, because with the allotment of people you're allowed to bring, you could bring those closest to you in theory, or your parents, or maybe brothers and sisters, perhaps some good friends. Like either way, you're able to bring enough of your close knit group where you still have that experience, and then there's watch parties going on in general back home. So it's a once in a lifetime experience. But if I felt like it wasn't going to happen within the first round, like if I felt like I was truly fringe where it's be the second, I don't know, I might take the step back. I want the Adam Silver, Adam Silver handshake, right? Like that's, I don't know, that it would be different for me if I was truly in a boat where I might not be taken till the second round.
The only reason you don't want to go, in my opinion, is if you're not sure where you're going to fall, and there's a chance for that slide, and you were expected to go high. So if you're expected, it's not going to happen. But Jarris Walker, we think could be at 7. Well, if he slides to 15 and then 18 and then 22,
the Will Levis effect is they're commonly calling it nowadays.
Want that. Yeah, or wasn't Aaron Rodgers as well?
Yes,
like there's almost always one individual that is just sliding. Sure. That's where it gets embarrassed. If you're Trace and you're going to go, in my opinion, 24 to 40, decent range, could be a first round, and you surprised everybody. Or maybe you go into a better situation and are taken early second round.
That is the good thing with the NBA draft. There's a number of different reasons. Positions alone is why it happens this way. But only 2 rounds, only one day. You don't have to have that same type of stress factor of, I might not get taken until tomorrow or Friday or Saturday.
Yeah.
At least you're guaranteed to get taken that night, assuming you have confidence that you're going to get taken.
A lot of players in play for the Pacers at 7. First, what'll be most interesting, what does Charlotte do at 2? Portland at 3. We'll break it all down and a lot more with someone who studies the draft year-round, Rafael Barlowe, NBABigBoard.com. He'll join us to discuss and preview the draft leading up to tomorrow night right here on the Fan Midday Show.
5, The Fan.
1 p.m. on this Wednesday. Thursday night, all attention will be inside the Barclays Center for the NBA draft. Pacers with 5 picks, starting at number 7. Not expecting for them to use all of those. But a lot of intrigue in this draft, and let's break it all down here on the Fan Midday shows. We're welcomed in on the hotline with Rafael Barlowe of NBABigBoard.com. And Rafael, I'm sure you're going through the line, talking with a lot of people leading up to the draft, a lot of different radio shows as well. Is the most intrigue right there at 2 and 3 of whether or not Charlotte stays or completes a deal, and the same thing with Portland?
Yeah, I'm here at the hotel where all the action and everybody's at, and nobody seems to know what is going on, and as far as is there going to be a lot of action or moving. I mean, it sounds like Brandon Miller to Charlotte is a lock, but right now everybody's just trying to figure out what happens with Portland.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard they're completely torn, Charlotte, on Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller. And Scoot, I think, talk about these two players. I think Scoot, we kind of know that he's going to be a success. It's just how big, where I think there's a lot more questions with Brandon both on and off the court. How do you see those two?
I actually think it's a little bit of the opposite. Just the people that I've spoken to feel like with Miller, it's an easier fit as far as plug and play with any system. And with Scoot, he's someone that, you kind of have to build around him, or you have to give him the keys to the franchise for him to be successful. So from everything that I've been hearing, people feel like Brandon is the guy that can fit if you already have like a star point guard, because he can play a complementary role because of his size and his shooting and defend multiple positions. But I've also heard that there are some teams that think that Scoot could possibly fall down to number 4, which is kind of shocking, but I just heard that probably about an hour or so ago.
Rafael, with all the rumblings around Damian Lillard and whether or not he really wants to still be a part of Portland and a potential rebuild for them, is it a clear indication that it is rebuild or development mode, whatever word you want to use, by the Portland Trailblazers if they keep the 3rd pick and take Scoot Henderson?
Oh, man.
Or take whoever. It doesn't have to be Scoop. You know what I mean? They use the pick. They don't trade it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely going to try to move it and try to get some help right away. But I wonder if teams already know that they're desperate to move it. Are they going to give them, like, their best package? From what I've been told, that Siakam, the Toronto, that is probably, like, the best deal. But I think Shaedon Sharpe is the hold-up there.
Talking with Rafael Barlowe, he's in New York City leading up to the draft tomorrow night. How about the Pacers? It gets real interesting there at 7. I think there's 3 or 4 players that they'd be very comfortable with, needing wings, needing defenders, needing rebounding. Who are a couple players you would spotlight for them at number 7?
Yeah, I think their range could be from Cam Whitmore to Jarrett Walker, Taylor Hendricks, but I've also heard that Bilal Coulibaly could also be in that mix.
Rafael, for Taylor Hendricks, I've started to warm on the idea of what he brings to the table with his versatility and just his ability to not only have the pull-up within his arsenal, but be solid with on-ball defense. When you're evaluating a prospect like Hendricks, who's had a real rise right out of the gate from just 1 year's time compared to where things were entering his freshman season, is it a flash in the pan, or is it, wow, this guy's really had a strong year and has the foundation of building something special in this league?
No, I don't think it's a flash in the pan. I think the only reason why people may think it is that because he wasn't like super highly touted coming out of high school. He didn't have the same buzz as like a Jarrett Walker or a Cam Whitmore, so he was outside of the top 50 recruits in the nation. So for some people, it's kind of like he kind of came out of nowhere. But, I mean, the kid shot 39% from 3 and averaged over a block in the game and is a defender. So I think he is someone that a lot of teams like because he's a plug-and-play guy. You can plug him in any system. He can knock down shots and defend. So I think he's going to be really good.
Two of the more intriguing players are, of course, the Thompson twins. Osar was originally scheduled to come here to Indianapolis for a workout, then that ultimately was canceled. Where do you stand on those two? Who do you think could have the higher upside. We know Amen more of kind of the point guard ball handling, and Asar a little bit more out on the wing, and was MVP the last couple of years down at Overtime Elite.
Yeah, what's interesting is that even though Amen is considered the better of the two, Asar is the two-time MVP.
Great.
And if you look at their assist numbers, I think it's like 6.2 for Amen and a 6.1 for Asar. The assist-to-turnover ratio is very similar. I honestly think that Asar is a point guard. He just didn't necessarily play as the primary because he was with his brother. But I think if he's on another team anywhere else, he is the primary ball handler. So I think that, they both could end up, having very similar careers. Amen is just probably the better athlete. But, he's probably arguably it'll be a top 5 athlete in the NBA next year. So I don't see much of a difference between those two.
Rafael Barlowe with us. You can follow him on Twitter at Barlowe500, head of NBA draft content over at NBABigBoard.com, director of scouting there as well. Speaking of Jarris Walker, we talked about him a little bit earlier in the conversation, but diving into what he brings to the table, the main knock on him is, can he do it consistently from beyond the arc at the NBA level? From your evaluation of what the tape's shown about him, is it an issue of consistency, or is it an issue of more mechanics-based that could be fixed or mended in the right system?
Yeah, these guys are young, so they're far from being a finished product. Jarris Walker was actually a pretty good shooter off the catch. The concern is that, maybe the free throw percentage indicates that he's a little bit further away. But if you just look at his overall numbers off the catch, I want to say he was shot like 30-something% from three off the catch. I think he's going to be fine. 41% on unguarded catch and shoot jumpers, and those aren't usually numbers you hear about a guy that they're shooting concern. So I just think that a year or two to get adjusted to the line, I think he's going to be fine as a shooter.
Rafael Barlowe with us. I want to talk about kind of some guys in play at the back end of the first round, Rafael, because Pacers, at least right now, having a couple of picks there, 26 and 29. Some names that I like: Andre Jackson, Colby Jones, a guy that's really surged, seeming like, is Omax from Marquette. Prosper, he was here, I think it was a couple weeks ago for interviews as well. And then I'll throw City Sissoko in there as well with G League Ignite. Among those guys, or if you have one other guy that stands out to you, who among that group really piques your interest?
Yeah, what? I don't think Omax, Maximus Prosper, will be available. I actually heard that I guess the Pacers have a ring the bell drill where you have to make 20 out of 25, or maybe it's 23. Either way, it's like you got to make 80% of your threes. And I heard that he was one of the few, if not the only prospect that was able to ring the bell in their drill. So I think he's someone that the Pacers would love, but I think they're going to have to move up to get him. And another name that I've been hearing is maybe Julian Phillips from Tennessee. Was highly touted coming into his freshman year. Didn't have the best year as far as efficiency, but he's a really good defender, and he can provide some wing depth for the Pacers. So that's a name. City Sissoko would be good. He's a guy that is more so of a natural point guard and ball handler, but playing with Scoot, he didn't really get the opportunity. And he was one of the better players in the G League in the second half of the season. I think he finished second in the G League in dunk for wings, which is tremendous growth for him because he used to be a little passive as far as attacking. So I like him there. What was the other name that you mentioned?
Colby Jones from Xavier, Ben Shepherd from Belmont. You could throw in G.G. Jackson, Max Lewis. Yeah. All those guys have been here for workouts.
Yeah, Colby Jones is the one that I think you could probably get at 32. Ben Shepherd is a guy that I think would be in the first round range. And then Gigi I honestly think that Gigi is a top 10 talent in this draft. He's just so young. Started off the season at 17. He's only 18 years old now. He's only eligible to be in this draft by 14 days. So I think he would be a good long-term developmental prospect. But I'll say this. If he stayed in his original class, this was 2024 draft, I think he would be the number one pick. So if Indiana gets him at somewhere late in the first round with one of their picks, and I think a developmental year, and you end up with a guy that would be a top 5 pick in 2024. So I would totally pull the trigger on that if he's available.
Yeah, he was very honest with us about the mistakes he made and the direction he needs to go and improve upon, more so even off the court. Youngest guy in the class, as you referenced. I am curious why he didn't, push it back another year, because by all indications, next draft, not that exciting in terms of top prospects. So in terms of where he could go, now it seems like I could see him falling into the late first round, and somebody's going to pull the trigger there and get him on a good rookie deal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just think I guess when your mind is already set on being a one and done, then it's hard to go back. But, he's a good kid. I've had a chance to be around him a few times this summer. I live in Dallas. He did a lot of his training in Dallas. Good kid, just is young, 18 years old, and hasn't really been away from home. And I think that's the concern with teams is, adding an 18-year-old to, and most teams are already young as is, but adding an 18-year-old that has never been away from home with millions of dollars in his pocket, I think that's probably the biggest concern for teams.
Rafael, when we talked to you before the NBA Draft Combine, we were discussing whether or not the value of those back-end first-rounders the Pacers have in 26 and 29 would be able to carry the day to get back into the middle of the first round. Let's say they keep 7 and they make a selection there. As you've gone through this further evaluation process and with us inside of 32 hours from draft night, is there enough value at the back of the draft, perceived value by teams, for if the Pacers wanted to package 26 and 29, they could get up to a 15 to 20 range?
Yeah, I think so. You may have to throw in a player in that mix, but I do think that there are some teams that may want to move back because it could be a guy that they like that they think could be available, in the back end of the first round, and they may be able to pick up an asset in return for it. I just can't see a situation where the Pacers bring in, 4? They have 4 picks, 4 or 5. I know they have 4 of the first 32. I just can't see a situation where they bring in all of those guys. I think they'll consolidate, and I think that they can move up.
Yeah, I think that's the word, Rafael. Rafael Barlowe joining us here of NBABigBoard.com. Consolidate. 5 picks, including 55, which it doesn't generally have a ton of value there. And right now, unless they make any moves, they only have 3 open roster spots. Plus, you could do another G League or 2. A 2-way contract as well. How about a couple local prospects? Talking about Jalen Hood-Schifino of IU, as well as Trace Jackson-Davis, who may work his way into the late first round.
Yeah, I think Trace Jackson-Davis is a guy that teams are just overthinking. Just off of numbers alone, I think outside of Wembanyama, he's the most productive prospect in this class on paper. And I just, like I said, I think teams are overthinking it. No, he doesn't shoot the ball or space the floor like you would like, but he finishes around the rim and is a very, very, very underrated passer and a good rebounder. So I think a playoff team that will need some depth in the front court should definitely take a flyer on him in the first round. And then Hood-Schifino, I think he has a pretty wide range. I think he can go anywhere from 13 through 20. So, he could end up being in the back end of the lottery, but I don't see him getting past 20.
Looking at 2 players that have made a name for themselves in the last couple of NCAA tournaments, looking at guys like Jaime Jaquez and Isaiah Wong, this is clearly back end of the first round, early second round pieces. You'll throw Jalen Clark in there at the very back of the second round in terms of where he's been mocked. Talking about guys that have had that type of success in March Madness that might provide instant growth potentially within a roster. We thought that would happen with Chris Duarte. Hasn't happened here in Indiana. But when you look at guys like that, Jaime Jaquez, Isaiah Wong, to name a few, what's your evaluation of them if they're selected in that range of values back into the first round, early second?
Yeah, I think only Jaquez is probably in the first round range. I think like Isaiah Wong is a guy. Honestly, I feel like if Isaiah Wong was born in a different era, he'd be a lottery pick. Just kind of has a scores isolation type game, which is really not today's NBA unless you're like a really good passer. But I think he could be someone that you could target maybe at 55. But as far as like their success, I think you have to factor in a little bit. I mean, they played on winning teams. They know how to contribute to winning. which is something that, a lot of the younger prospects don't have. But I think Highkin is the best of that group that could be a real target for the Pacers.
Rafael, do you have a favorite player that you're tracking? Curious how high he may get drafted.
Honestly, we talked about him a few seconds ago, but I'm just curious to see where Gigi goes.
Yeah.
Because, I think he's a top 10 talent as far as just his size and how he's able to handle the ball. And I think he has a really wide range. He's worked out for a lot of teams that have lottery picks, but he could also fall to the end of the first round. I just think if he goes to the right system with good development and veterans, I think in 5 years from now we'll look back and say, man, why didn't he go higher? So Gigi's the guy that I'm probably tracking the most.
Rafael, when you look at what Rick Carlisle is trying to build here, you look at the pieces they have in place, guys like Bennett Mathurin, Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, if they stay at 7, is there a perfect fit piece in your mind? Obviously, we don't know what the team's going to do, but as you look at prospects that are in that range, is there a guy you feel like could mesh well with what they want to do, which is be a consistent offensive team, but also finally have that defense meet them in the middle and be a true, I don't want to say contender, but a true threat on a night-in-night basis because of their defense?
Yeah, I think Hendricks and Taylor Hendricks, that is, and Jarris Walker provide the most defense as far as just being available, ready to come in and compete on the defensive end. And I don't know if he will be available. I mean, there are some rumors that he could be, but I like the Cam Whitmore fit. Now, he's also pretty young, only 18, but I think he has upside to be one of the better players in this class. And I really think that he would be the better offensive player of the three guys that I mentioned.
Rafael, appreciate the time. Get back to interviews and enjoy draft night tomorrow night, all right?
Thank you so much. Anytime you want me on, let me know.
We
Thanks,
appreciate
Rafael.
it. That's Rafael Barlowe, NBA, BigBoard.com. Always good to discuss this draft stuff ahead of time here, man. And there's so many names you've gotten comfortable with, familiar with. And I think more than anything, what makes this most interesting to Pacer fans here in Indiana, Jimmy, is the fact that they have so many picks. And so to use the optionality, the bevy of options, is what Ryan Carr, the VP of Player Personnel, was talking about with us a couple days ago. There's an array in which way in which they can attack this, and I don't think we'll get any true clarity really until tomorrow. That's when, if you do trade, whether it's to acquire a veteran or to say move up.
We do have one piece of clarity, though, right? They've made it clear, and you've stressed it as well on Fieldhouse Files and when you've been here on the show, that they're not making 5 selections tomorrow night.
Can't imagine.
So that's at least one piece of clarity when, as a casual fan, you can get overwhelmed the idea of, oh man, 5 picks, 5 rookies coming in. Well, in all likelihood, that's not what's going to happen. So it's not a question of if they make a trade, it's when they make that trade.
And how many.
And how many are they made, and what's coming back. Is it 7? Is it a package of the second rounders? Does it involve the 2 first rounders they have at the back end? Are they looking for more? Are they looking to, like you mentioned, consolidate their assets to go up and get another rookie? Or are they looking to put together a package with picks to go get a ready starter right now that answers their needs at wing? That's the area we don't have the clarity on. But where we do have is that the one thing that would shock me of anything else that could happen to the Pacers tomorrow night is 5 selections, or all 5 selections are made with where they're at.
Yeah, I would and completely agree with that. It's just a matter of where they go with that 7th pick kind of starts things off. Mm-hmm. Here's where what I would do. I'd set the over under at 2.5. What do you like?
Moves?
2.5. No, I'm sorry, 2.5 draft picks.
Oh, 2.5 draft picks.
I think 2's a given.
Yeah,
and 3 very possible, because also taking the fact that 55 generally not that valuable, not that valuable, and then secondly, they do have an additional 2A roster spot. All teams do, moving from 2 to 3. So whether that's pick 29 or 30, or no, they would get a guaranteed contract, but pick 32 or 55, or maybe if you shuffle around the deck a little bit in that second round, and you could maybe even trade up if there was a guy hanging around at 45. I could see 3 very likely.
I'd go over. Yeah, I'd go over 2.5. I'd say 3 total selections made. Probably the more enticing line, if we're like looking at it from that angle, was 3.5, because, like you mentioned, 55 is probably given to be selected. How many people are really going to be interested in that outside of Feels like there's always one chance every year of a team that is strapped up by the cap and need to make a move of, hey, here's some cash considerations. We'd like to buy a draft pick. Like that sometimes happens.
They did that with
Utah
a couple of years ago.
So maybe you see something like that, but unless they're doing what I would like them to do, which is packaging all these first rounders to either move up or to try to get a ready now wing, you would be looking at, okay, how do you get to the 17th pick, for example? I'm just using LA as an example. Yep. Well, you'd give up 26, 29. What else is given up there? Are you giving up a player? Are you giving up a second round pick this year, second rounder next year? Are you eating cap space with a team? Like, what are you doing to get up in the draft? And then how many picks are you left with? Yeah, I would say probably about 3.
And then by Friday, after we have the clarity on what they did draft night, then that will really help us inform what it looks like leading up to free agency on July 1, because they're still overloaded with bigs. We cannot go through another year, Jimmy, where, all right, it's Isaiah Jackson's night. Okay, now Jalen Smith's the backup big tonight. Oh, what about Daniel Tice? You could move 2 of those guys. You probably should move at least 1. And the same is maybe true for the backcourt as well, depending on what they draft. You got Chris Duarte, Buddy Hield. You could include Jordan Nwora in that mix. I don't think they're really looking to move off of Aaron Nesmith. But he could be part of that group. A lot of different routes they could go. I think it's important for them not to rush things, not to get in a hurry here because of what Tyrese Halliburton led the team to last year.
Well, and we highlighted this last week after the Nuggets won the title.
Yeah.
I get it. Like, I've grown up in the generation, you've grown up in the generation where as a society we want everything instant gratification. The Nuggets had their stars, in theory, over a 6 or 7 year window, but it took that amount of time with what they thought were centerpieces to eventually get over the hump. We talk about it from an angle of, yes, I'd love the Pacers to be in a spot where they are a 4 to 6 seed next year. We talked about where you can find the action on Fieldhouse Files. I mentioned it yesterday on 1075thefan.com. That is what this team is approaching this draft for, is not just to be a play-in team. They would like to be a legitimate playoff team, and they're not having to work any harder than a team 1 through 6 would have to do. And even if that doesn't happen next year, I'm not saying don't be a fan and don't enjoy it, but from the front office standpoint, don't get short-sighted of let's make it about just getting to the playoffs. Look at what Denver did and the time it took to do it. Let's be patient. And that's how the Pacers traditionally operate as a front office. They don't make moves based on emotion. They let things play as they are, and then they attack. I've talked about it as well, Scott. At least in the Kevin Pritchard era, there have been these trades that are made that are out of the sky, never thought it was possible even in a trade machine. And, okay, we're ready to roll. Let's go out there. This is who we have. Yeah. I look back to the Sabonis and Oladipo trade when they acquired them, moving Paul George. I look at how they got Tyrese Halliburton. That's almost the type of move I'm anticipating with the amount of draft capital they have. Whether or not that actually comes to fruition, I don't know. But Kevin Pritchard has been so crafty on trades that's kind of what I'm expecting in terms of a return on your investment with whatever they end up doing on draft night.
Yeah, I think it's been proven over this last decade. And what's wild is this will be his 7th draft leading. Talk about making me feel old again. But so he's crushed trades. I'm sorry. Drafts weren't great for the last decade until the last couple of years. And here's some news from Woj. The Nuggets are trading a first-round pick next year and a 40th pick this year for 29 and 32. So there you go.
So we have our answer.
So there's 2 less picks, and so see my 2.5 number. My 2.5 number.
You're looking
is
good now.
Pretty.
You're looking good with that ticket.
And here's why I like this. This is exactly one route I thought they should go. Is kick the can down the road for a future first round pick. The trouble, though, assuming it's theirs, the Denver Nuggets, is what is their first round pick going to be, right? 28, 29?
Yeah.
So you know that's not going to be a good first round pick. But one of the picks they traded was the 29 and the 32 pick. And maybe we should take a break, rehash what just went down, and I want to explain why a team like the Nuggets in this 32nd pick is very valuable to them, much more so than with the Pacers. This is the Fan Midday Show here on 107.5 and 93.5 The Fan.
And 5, The Fan.
According to Woj, the Pacers have made a move already leading up to the draft for tomorrow night, and that's getting some clarity on their picks. They were slated to have, and now they will have 4. They're going to trade picks 29 and 32 this year, and will be getting the 40th pick this year, along with Denver's first-round pick next year. So basically those 29 basically wipe each other out, right? You're just doing it 1 year later. And then you're moving back from 32 to 40. So the first thought on all this is
the move before the move.
Couldn't you have gotten more? Because you're helping them out. And you know the Denver pick's not going to be any good next year if things go according to plan. I guess what I was expecting was a team that would not be, again, perhaps the best team next year, and so maybe you would be able to move up from 29 to 20, and the cost of doing so and playing ball with Denver would allow for you to move back a few spots in that second round.
So look, all that about I'm excited for the sexy, flashy moves that Kevin Pritchard had been accustomed to make, and then no more than a minute goes by, and we have the exact opposite of that in terms of it's not a sexy trade. It's just a move, and it's fine. It achieves a need in terms of adding more to their cupboard moving forward. Kevin Bone has mentioned that in the past. In fact, I'm pretty sure he mentioned it today. on Kevin and Query a little bit earlier. Of course, you can catch that right here, 7 to 10 a.m. on the Fan. Look, this is okay, they made a move, great type of reaction for me. But what is next? Because they're still in the same boat for this year's draft as they were 2 minutes ago, which is 3 roster spots available and 4 picks now. Because they had 5, you offset one of them with the 40th pick coming in and 29 and 32 going out. You still have 4 picks within this year's draft. Granted, though, one of them is still pick 55. How much value does that really bring? But surely this is not it on the trade front for them, is at least what I'm telling myself reaction as this news hits the Twitter sphere.
Sure. And let me complete the tease that I did leading into the break here. And that was regarding this new exception. We have a collective bargaining agreement that's not quite done yet, but it'll be it was ratified and will be taking effect come July 1. And because of this new exception, there's more value for these teams that are in the luxury tax for these second-round picks. Because moving forward with this new CBA, they'll be allowed to sign these second-round picks to 3- and 4-year deals without having to either use cap space or their non-tax mid-level exception. So I know this is a lot of minutia. It's a little deep in the weeds, but this is why I fully expected the Pacers to move pick 32. I thought it'd probably go to some team like the Warriors, like the Lakers, a team that's really Phoenix Suns, that's really deep in the luxury tax. I'll have to look where the Nuggets are at, because you talk about the success that they've had, Jimmy, and it's through the draft. Jokic, 2014. Murray, 2016. Big swing on Michael Porter Jr. 2 years later in 2018, as he fell back many spots because of health considerations. They rebuilt the team through the draft. Calvin Booth took over a year ago as the general manager as Tim Connolly went up and I believe back home to Minnesota. But they're looking to stock up on picks now, and I love this for a team like Denver. They want to maximize this window with Jokic as best they can. This is the second one of those deals that they've completed this month to get more picks right now. For the Pacer side of it, I just thought they could have gotten more.
It's hard to really find the true Pacer side of it, other than, again, adding assets for the future, and you're down to 4 picks now instead of 5. From Denver's side of it, it's fascinating because it's an immediate response to Bruce Brown's inevitable departure with where they are from a cap space standpoint, and the idea of having to spend a ton of money when you're already paying, 4-5 players north of $30 million, something like that, in terms of the contract situation they have.
It's unreal
around.
what Phoenix is doing.
So I get it from a Denver standpoint of, you look at what Christian Brown brought to the table in minutes during the finals, and you look at the ability to have contributors right away or within your defense of your crown with Bruce Brown's departure, and then you go back and look at who's within that range of pick 29, Trace Jackson Davis, Julian Phillips. We'd mentioned Jaime Jaquez. His name is floated around in range between 23 and 30. Who's going to be there remains to be seen, but it's a move that you make as a defending champion where you know a key asset, a valuable contributor in Bruce Brown is gone. As you mentioned, it's harder for teams that are against the cap or in that territory to acquire fresh blood. The best way to still do it is through the draft. I get it for Denver. I'm not necessarily mad about it from the Pacers standpoint. It's just I envision them moving picks to either go up in the draft or moving picks to try to bring in a veteran of some kind, not obtain a pick next year. But again, I don't think they're done. I don't think this is the only trade that they make when you still have 4 selections with 3 roster spots, even though one of them is 55. So I guess at the end of the day, you could make all 4, and at the 55th pick, impresses you, okay, maybe he bumps who you took at 40 with the Denver selection you now get.
So to reset, the Pacers now have pick 7, 26, no longer 29 and 32, but also 40 and then 55. So 4 picks, 1 deal on the verges to being completed here, not quite yet, and probably another or 2 to come here. I fully expect for Kevin Pritchard in this front office to have this type of activity. Pritchard talked about it to us at the draft lottery, saying he expected, just for their bevy of picks, he expected 50-some calls to come in and check the status, check the value, because the number of picks the Pacers had. It was them and Charlotte with 5. Now Charlotte's all alone with 5 picks, and the Pacers down to 4. And at 40, here's what the Pacers thinking there, is that the same range of player that they were going to get at 32 will still be at 40. Remember when Rafael was on the show at 1 o'clock? I named about 5-6 players. There's probably 4 more I could have easily rattled off in that range. That's why. There's so many different guys right here that the Pacers will be able to claim at 40, assuming they still keep that pick, because going back to what I referenced a few minutes ago at pick 40, those second-round picks are immensely valuable for teams that are into the luxury tax, paying that tax, and especially paying into the second apron coming up in the next CBA, like a Phoenix, as you referenced. But we know the Suns, they don't really care for the draft at all. I mean, Kevin Ornovitz at ESPN.com wrote that story last year, basically how they don't care for the draft, and, well, that fact's been proven here. Is I'm not sure they control any one of their picks in the next decade.
Where does this affect 2024 in terms of the range of options for them? Because the language is getting the least favorable selection. It is what ends up going with the Pacers with this pick. Where does that impact 2024 in your mind in terms of the range of outcomes you could have? Is it what we've discussed, is that it's likely going to be in that 28 to 30 range in terms of wherever their season ends? Is that basically what we're looking at in the range of outcomes for them?
In terms of what you expect those picks to be, I think you'd probably expect the Pacers' own pick, which they own, to be something like 16 to 21. And then this one, I think you'd figure to be one of the last picks in the first round.
The reason I ask is because Bobby Marks highlights least favorably, tweeted Adrian Wojnarowski's tweet about the Nuggets trading the least favorable of the 2024 first-round picks in the deal with the Pacers, and he highlights the least favorable of OKC, Clippers, Utah, if it's in the 11 to 30 range, and Houston if it's in the 5 to 30 range, is what Bobby Marks highlights there.
Sure. Yeah. This is one of those, the only thing I don't quite understand is dropping the Pacers playing ball with the Nuggets, but losing some spots, going from 32 to 40 this year. To me, that first round pick's basically a swap, right? It's just pushing the can down the road a year. Now, that said, the Pacers had been very high on this draft. By all accounts, everyone thinks this draft's way better than the next couple. So you would think you'd want to get it in now, although, again, you don't have those roster spots. You're going to have to pay Tyrese Halliburton, so there's an expense. Buddy Hield, if he's on your roster, he'll be due a new contract. Miles Turner will be in a contract year, not this year, but the next. So the Pacers will be reaching a point here in a couple of years where they will have probably 2 max contract guys on their roster, and they have to figure out what they're working with. And so by doing this, you're spacing out the picks, spacing out the influx of young talent, these 18, 19-year-olds onto your roster.
I still feel like there's something else coming.
Absolutely.
And that's what, again, we didn't get the initial just fist pump type move. Okay, things are rolling now, because there's not really a clear benefit of doing a deal with Denver outside of, again, adding an asset next year that could be very low down the totem pole of draft order. And it's interesting that they would want that kind of flexibility, knowing that expectations are not that the Pacers' own first round pick would be a high lottery pick again next year. They want that to be something that is in that 18, 19, 20 and below range if they're really hitting the bar they want to next season.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Scott. As a fallout of this move, would you expect their next move to involve like a Jalen Smith, an Isaiah Jackson, Chris Duarte, someone along those lines to move up in the draft, or get a veteran wing to help Tyrese and Ben?
Yeah, the first thing is, depends what wings are actually available. if it's legit. And so many of us want to talk about OG Anunoby. Nobody knows for sure he's even available, that
Right.
he's on the market, that Toronto's willing to deal him. I think more than anything, that's connecting dots. We saw a couple years ago when the Pacers dealt, what was it? I think it was a late first pick in Aaron Holiday to get the 20th pick. I'm coming off the top of my head.
I think
and
it was
get
around
Isaiah
pick
Jackson.
30. I think it was like 30-31 to Washington.
Yes.
And then they got
and
Isaiah,
Aaron Holiday.
Yeah.
And maybe a late second to go up and get Isaiah Jackson. So you could see some type of move like that where you're throwing pick 26 and a player to go up and get 17. I think that's very, very possible. Again, I like this draft class. I like how I'm not stuck on any one or two guys. I think you would be very content and happy with a handful of different guys at each positioning. But yeah, there's no way the Pacers are done right now. They've had a lot of conversation with teams going back at least a week, and if anything, I'm kind of surprised that this was done early afternoon. Remember, in Mountain Time, it's not even the afternoon just yet. This allows for the deal to be finalized and for Denver, by the way, to then have clarity on where it's going to be drafted. Here's the awkward thing. I'm not sure this will be official from the NBA.
Yeah.
And this is where the NBA totally gets it wrong compared to the NFL.
Yeah, we hate this.
We might have a situation, guys, where coming up with pick 29, it'll be Adam Silver. With the 29th pick, the Pacers select.
Yeah.
And we all know, nah, this guy's going to Denver. He's going to be wearing a Pacers hat.
Kawhi Leonard.
Yes. Yeah.
That was a draft night trade, so it was much different. But yes, in the same respects. Even last year.
But they announce it in the NFL. They still, like, even if it's a draft night trade, they'll announce that the pick has been traded. They won't have a fake, oh, here's your hat. Welcome to the Steelers. Oh, sorry, you're a Raider. Like, that just doesn't happen. So that's Eddie's point. Like, yeah, it was a draft night trade, but to your overall point, Scott, it remains the same, whether it's draft night or less than 32 hours out. It's still that logistic aspect of it it's the Pacers selection, but it's not. The Nuggets have the pick. And
vice versa. If the Pacers stay at 40, it'd be a Nuggets pick, but it'd actually go to the Pacers. Yeah.
At 40, by the way, just from the different mocks
let's go.
of areas of that
Let's
range,
go.
I know you love a good mock. I know it. You're looking at that Isaiah Wong, Jalen Pickett, Gigi Jackson range in terms of fluctuation there. I know that there's no guarantee that Jackson goes that low, but you're now looking at a different range of prospects that we've had conversations about already today that could be more enticing or somewhat enticing in that range than what you're looking at 55 if they hold on to that pick. So there's still value within the second round where I'm not against them trading back. It's just you're adding a future first-round pick asset that, again, you could turn and trade into something else, or you could then go ahead and hold on to it next year to see what it becomes. I would lean more towards a future trade, maybe not the trades we're talking about, but a future trade down the line of moving that Nuggets pick versus it being something that's actually selected, again, given where this team wants to be a year from now.
A couple other players, Jimmy, to highlight in that 40 range. You're looking at Colby Jones from Xavier, Julian Phillips possibly of Tennessee, even Jordan Walsh, who I think is kind of like an Andre Iguodala 2.0. He's in that range as well. I kind of like him in the second round. Scott, what about you?
The guys that jump out at me in that range, if Julian Phillips somehow falls, that'd be hard to see. Max Lewis was just here yesterday, by the way, and I think he's slated in that range. He's a wing from Pepperdine, 7-foot wingspan. I thought it was interesting. They brought back the player from Dayton for his second workout and wanted to see Max Lewis for the first time, a guy that Ryan Carr was noting played the saxophone. Like, those are the little things they love and get deep into the weeds with these guys. But I could see if J.G. Jackson falls, and if you get a guy that could be a lottery pick the next year, if he would have stayed in or if not higher, Trace could be on the board at that range. Ricky Council, the fourth, Omari Moore. Julian Strother, I will say, go the Gonzaga route once more. He was in and was really impressive. Very mature, another wing. Again, I think all you're looking at for the Pacers in this range, or really in this draft, is to add some depth on the wing, which is almost non-existent. From a defensive standpoint, shooting, two-way type of guys. And, yeah, this is the first of several moves that I think you can expect from the Pacers. We know they were going to be active. You knew they wanted to set themselves up both for this year And in doing so, this is another way to manage the books.
There's one.
I'm just kind of surprised they didn't get another pick in this.
There is one answer that we have with this move, and that is the idea that the 26th and 29th pick, with the value as first rounders, albeit late first rounders, likely weren't enticing enough to package with 7 to go out and get a wing as the type of weight that future first round picks would carry. We were mentioning a hypothetical of, look, here's 3 first rounders. That's something that somebody like Toronto might be interested in. Well, it's 3 first rounders, but 2 of them are on the back end. The fact that 26 and 29 weren't packaged together, because you would assume all the calls are being made by the Pacers at this point to make moves, tells me that maybe that's not the evaluation they thought they would get by keeping those picks together, and they instead found this as an alternate avenue to gain draft capital down the way while keeping 26.
I mostly agree with that, although I will say if you're a team receiving picks, I don't think I'd want 3 in the same draft.
It's fair.
So now it becomes a package become more enticing, knowing if you could get a couple this year and 1 next year. Now the Pacers have their own draft picks moving forward, so it's not like they couldn't have offered one of those and all of that. But I just, right now, I just don't see a move at 7.
A move away from 7.
Yes, I still believe you keep 7. I think you make the pick, you go with the biggest potential, because again, to what we talked about at the start of the show, if you're just joining us here late, this should be the last time the Pacers are in the lottery for the foreseeable future. So you got to hit, and you want to hit big. I'm not sure you want to just trade that away for a guy who has 1 more year under contract or 2 more years and is going to cost you $18-20 million. You like this draft. You like the talent.
You could afford to do it, though, if it was the right fit.
You can for the next 2 years.
Sure.
After the next 2 years, then it gets really tricky because you'll have at least Halliburton on an extension. Miles, by then I think you would move on from, just from an age standpoint as a big, turning 30. Buddy could stay in the league forever. I don't think he'll.
They do have bird rights though on Halliburton, don't they?
Oh, for sure.
So I mean,
Halliburton will get done.
You can manipulate things with the cap in such a way that you're not totally handcuffed if you feel like a 25 or 26-year-old wing that's out there. Again, not just OG, but any wing that's in that age range. As long as you get an extension done with that player before they come in, you're not totally handcuffed if it's the right guy. But I'm with you on the mark that if that market's not there, you were bad this year, unintentionally or intentionally. You were bad and have this lottery pick and you don't want to be here anymore. Yes, it has to be an impactful guy that carries you out of this cellar of lottery picks.
100%. And that's why it's so important for the Pacers to not only nail this one, but to get a high-value pick with big potential. A lot more to come here. Draft Central, essentially, here, leading up to the draft tomorrow night. Coming up at 2 o'clock, Sean Highkin covers the Portland Trail Blazers. We'll discuss the intrigue at 2 and at 3 and the future of Dame Lillard and a lot more. But the Pacers have made a trade with the Denver Nuggets. Discuss that and a lot more here on the Fan Midday Show coming up.
Fan.
Well, back inside the DriveHuber.com studios, the Fan Midday Show. Big news in the sports world. Reds are rallying. Reds are rallying. 3-2. Bottom of the fifth. Eddie Garrison on watch.
Jimmy, that's about the fifth different route I thought you might go with.
I know.
Sports news.
I like being unpredictable. We got a tie game now. It's 3-3. Reds riding a 10-game win streak. Biggest news of the day. No? Well, maybe second, with the Pacers having their first of what would hopefully be many moves between now and Thursday night's draft conclusion. Eddie, I understand that from your editorial standpoint, you'd probably put the Reds first, and who can blame you? It's their longest win streak in 11 years.
About everywhere, like, should be on the ticker right now on the ESPN.
I agree. We should,
even the NFL Network, they should be on the ticker. Like, come on, what are we doing?
I need pitch-by-pitch notifications on my phone right now. It's very, very,
or
very
you could just
important.
look up at the TV.
You're right. I can also utilize many a television here in the DriveHuber.com studios. But, of course, that news that Scott and I had discussed a little bit earlier, breaking by Adrian Wojnarowski, about, a half hour ago, Denver Nuggets are trading the 2024 first-round pick in a 2023 selection. That's their 40th pick to the Pacers, with picks 29 and 32 from tomorrow night's draft moving on. Scott, as we look at what is potentially available for the Pacers and where the dust settles on these moves, even if they have another trade in mind between now and draft night, which we expect they likely would, doesn't change anything with the 7th pick, which is likely keeping that and making a selection in your mind, because they don't want this to be a team in a vicious cycle of staying in the lottery. They want to jump next year, and unless a perfect trade materializes, you do it by making your selection at 7.
Yeah, I still believe drafting at 7 is the right move. There's too many good options right there. They've done their due diligence. They're talking with those top players right there at the draft combine, hosting 62 players to Indy for pre-draft workouts. Unless something is just something you just cannot pass up, I don't know what I don't feel the urgency some do for the team to get involved with a trade and move on from that 7th pick. Remember, it was only last year when they made their first pick inside the top 10 since 1989. Back-to-back years here, hopefully for just the last time in the next, let's call it this decade. So I think it's important to strike big time right now. Get a player that can grow with Rick Carlisle, that coaching staff, alongside Tyrese Halliburton. And so many of these players that came in for pre-draft workouts have mentioned the fact, like, giddy about, hey, that could be my point guard, because they know they're going to be a better player. Just look at Buddy Hield. You look at Miles Turner. You're going to get more shots from 3. You're going to be able to attack. Tyrese takes a lot of the burden for this team in so many different ways. And if they could just shore up this wing spot and add some defense, things get a lot more interesting.
Let's play the other side of this coin, which is there's not another move that happens. Where does this trade then line up in your mind if there's not a subsequent move that's made? They make all 4 selections, and there's no trade activity from them over the next 48 hours or 36 hours.
First of all, I would be a little bit surprised, just because of the number of picks and the few roster spots. I don't think everybody that's currently under contract will be here next year.
Sure.
We don't know the way in which that will exactly shake out, because there's no obvious change until you know what the draftees look like and what positions they might play. You would like to simplify and shore up that center spot with, Miles, but then what is Daniel Tice? He likes it here, would love to be here, but do you want to go younger with 2 guys you already have, in Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith? Then maybe you could convince me to keep those 2 on board along with Miles, but I don't think you need 4 of those right there. Point guard, you are covered and feeling very good about, with Halliburton, with Nembhard, with TJ McConnell. Shooting guard, Rick Carlisle, man, he loves his shooters. I don't think he'll ever tell you he has enough shooters. And so at pick 40, which the Pacers just acquired from Denver for this year's draft, you might get your shooter right there. Or you might get a player that is young, high upside, like a G.G. Jackson, that needs maturity, needs some time under the system, is not going to help you right away.
Does that conversation get shifted if they decide to get the do-it-all shooter that can help contribute on the defensive end and hit. I don't mean just a shooter by name. I mean a shooter in terms of positioning. If they were to go, if a Thompson twin falls, if a Men Thompson falls, or if they were in a range where they wanted to take, maybe they really like Azar Thompson, if that's the path they decide to go down.
Okay.
How does that change then the need for a wing ready immediately, if at all? I know we only got like a minute to discuss that. We'll dive into it a little bit more, large scale, but that's the conversation that will be unfolding over the next 24 hours of where is that biggest need at 7? Is it a luxury pick? Is it a need? Is it just a fit? I mean, those are the type of conversations that are going to continue to be had over the course of the next 24 hours. We're going to step aside when we return. Speaking of a team that has arguably a more important draft than the Pacers do right now in terms of the state of their franchise, it's the Portland Trailblazers. They're connected to a lot of different rumors in the trade market. Sean Highkin covers the Trailblazers for Rose Garden Report. He had an interesting piece last night about the importance of this draft. We'll dive into it with him when we return on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
The Fan.
Welcome back into the Fan Midday Show with Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison. I'm Scott Agnes. Just a day away from the NBA draft. This hour, or I guess it would be last hour, Pacers already shaking up their draft assets, moving on from 29 and 32 of this year to pick up an extra first next year and pick 40, and we'll get on that a little bit later. Now we're going to where some intrigue is at the top of the draft. Charlotte at 2, and then followed by the Portland Trailblazers. What are they going to do? I welcome in my friend Sean Highkin. He runs the Rose Garden Report at rosegardenreport.com. And Sean, I thought it was bold yet honest and true last night, writing where the Trailblazers stand last night and how this is a huge and pivotal point in franchise history. What are your thoughts leading into tomorrow night?
Well, I'm not breaking any news there with how, potentially huge this draft is. They haven't had this high of a draft pick since 2007 when they took Greg Oden number 1 overall over Kevin Durant. And, especially in a draft where I would say most executives, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing, outside of Victor Wembanyama, who's obviously going number one to San Antonio, most people think that Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller are kind of on their own tier as the two and, the second and third best prospects in the draft in whatever order you want to put them in. So whatever position, the Blazers kind of have the easiest pick in the draft, if you will, besides number one, where whichever one of those two guys Charlotte doesn't take, they're happy to take. But then there's also kind of the dynamic of, they have said both publicly and privately that they still intend and want to build around Damian Lillard and try to still contend in the playoffs while he's still playing at the level that he's playing at. And he has kind of made it clear publicly that, drafting a player at number 3 rather than trading the pick for a more veteran piece is not something that he would be thrilled if they did. So it's going to be an interesting, 5 minutes that they're on the clock tomorrow, one way or the other, to see which way they go.
Sean, let's start there. If they do make that selection at 3, is that a clear indication that, I don't know if you want to call it a rebuild or whatever word it fits best in this scenario, but is that clear that they are not building, in their mind, a team that will contend for a championship within Damian's contract window?
Not necessarily, at least not the way they feel. I think they feel, and you can land wherever you want to land on this. I will land wherever I land on it. But they feel that there are other ways that they have to get veteran talent, whether that be using the mid-level exception in free agency or potentially trading Anthony Simons plus the number 23 overall pick that they also have tomorrow for, other veteran upgrades. Like they feel like they have other avenues, and if they don't get a deal that they like for the third pick, they're not going to trade the pick just to trade the pick. There's a very small list of guys that they are, that they would be open to moving the pick for, and if one of those guys doesn't shake free or something else unexpected doesn't come along that blows them away, they've been signaling that they're very happy to keep the pick and use it, whichever one of those two guys it is. And how Dame reacts to that, whether he ultimately asks for a trade, if he does ask for a trade, whether they ultimately trade him or not, that this is stuff that's all up in the air.
Talking with Sean Highkin. Sean, I'm curious, what do your readers and fans in Portland feel about this pivot potentially point in franchise history of trying to have a guy like a Reggie Miller and Dame Lillard that's been there forever and only plays for one team versus, all right, that's past its expiration date, let's do something else?
I think, and Scott, this, being as online as we are, having to, there's a certain very vocal minority of fans that feel one way, and then the majority kind of feels the other way. There definitely is a contingent that say, they're never going to win a title with Dame. You should just trade Dame and rebuild. I think the vast majority of people would not like to see that happen. I know that the Blazers organization would not like to see that happen. I know that Damian Lillard at the end of the day would not like to see that happen. I think everybody is pretty motivated to get enough done to feel like there's a way forward together. It's just again, like there's a small amount of trades that could present themselves that they would think is worth it to move the third pick for, especially in a draft with two guys at the top that in most drafts that don't have Victor Wembanyama in it would be seriously in contention to go number 1 overall, and especially with the new CBA being so restrictive at the top, having a potential star on a rookie scale deal, I think is something that they view as very valuable, and that's something that they'd have to get a pretty compelling offer to move off of. And the other thing is, I think Dame knows that. Like, Dame is a smart guy. Dame follows the league as much as anybody does, as far as players in the league do. Like, he watched a ton of league pass. He knows players and teams around the league. He knows the salary cap. He knows all that stuff very well. Like, I don't think he would want the Blazers to make a bad deal with the pick just to make a deal. I think he wants them to trade the pick for a veteran, for somebody more on his timeline, but I don't think he's saying, oh, you have to trade the pick and make a bad deal where, it ends up hurting the franchise.
And Sean, I think what's interesting too, kind of compare it here to Indy, Tyrese Halliburton was at basically all the workouts, and from your stories, Dame was basically at all of Portland's workouts. What, if anything, do you read into that, both short-term and long-term?
I mean, I don't think he would be at least showing his face publicly at these workouts if he was, working behind the scenes to set up his exit. I think that's, that's pretty clear. Now, I don't really have any insight. Well, I haven't talked to him in a while, so I don't know one way or the other which of these prospects he likes more than the others. But, I think the fact that he was there with the front office watching these workouts, like he's very involved in the process. I don't think he's dictating, draft this guy, don't draft this guy. I mean, I'll tell you this, last year he would have preferred that they traded the number 7 pick somewhere else to get more of a win now guy. And they got pretty close with Toronto on OG Anunoby, and ultimately Toronto wanted too much in addition to the 7th pick, and they drafted Shaedon Sharpe. And at the time, on draft night, Dame was kind of thinking, is this really what you guys want to do to maximize my window? I don't know if I want you guys to have drafted a rookie. And then, towards the end of the season, Shaedon Sharpe, I think, kind of won him over, and now he's totally on board with Shaedon Sharpe. I think the Blazers, if they decide not to move the pick, are making the bet that that's going to happen again with Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller, whichever one of those guys is there at 3. Now, is that bet going to pay off again, or is it not this time? That kind of remains to be seen.
Sean, when I look around the NBA, franchises would kill to have a player in this modern era that values the franchise the way that Damian Lillard does. And in every turn, whenever there's been a rumor mill about him potentially wanting to go elsewhere, being traded, he's responded by signing extensions or signing his most recent extension to show he wants to spend his career in Portland. The fact that the volume of Dame maybe wants out, or maybe he's ready to finally move on because both the franchise and him are on different timelines, is jarring to me because it's never been like that before with Lillard. There's been rumor mills about him being dealt, but it's never been a feeling of, wow, this might really be the time where he's ready to move on. Is this all true, or is it basically rumors at this point of Dame might actually want to take a career shift because he realized even though he loves the franchise, they might be on different timelines for championship contention?
I would argue it actually got pretty close in the summer of 2021 after they lost in the first round to a Denver team that didn't have Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr., and then the general manager at the time, Neil Olshey, fired Terry Stotts and said that the first-round exit was not a product of the roster, and then made a very controversial coaching hire in Chauncey Billups that he then tried to put on Dame once he started getting blowback for it. So I would say at that point, Dame actually was pretty seriously, and he said this on the record, I'm not breaking it.
Right.
He was pretty seriously looking around that summer saying, yeah, I don't know if this is really where I want to be. And then I think winning the power struggle with Neil Olshey that he ended up winning a couple months later and then signing the extension, I think he ended up feeling like, okay, this is where I want to be. And I think he has a better and more trusting relationship with Joe Cronin, the current general manager, than he ever did with Neil Olshey. And I think he genuinely feels that Joe Cronin is going to make every effort to do what needs to be done to build a team around him. But, Joe Cronin also, like I said, he isn't going to make a bad deal just to make a deal. Like, he's not going to trade the pick for, just to throw a name out there, Zach LaVine, just to say, hey, look, we got a veteran guy. It's not the right guy. The better move is to hold on to the pick. And I think Dame understands that. So, we will see what happens. I don't think Dame is going into this offseason looking for an excuse to want out. He is looking for, them to do enough that he's totally comfortable.
Talking with Sean Highkin of the RoseGardenReport.com. And Sean, one of the bigger things, too, you've been tracking in all over the last year or two is the potential eventual sale of the Blazers down the road. And I think as you've written, and what really makes sense, too, is the fact that once there is expansion, the trust or, that will go to charity, part of that would not go there. They would cash in on that, which makes a big reason why Portland holds off until any type of influx of additional teams here. Is that still your read on it? Do you think if it is 2 or 3 years down the road, do you still see the Nike owner wanting to get involved and leave a legacy behind with that?
Phil Knight, as far as I know, is still very, very motivated to buy the Blazers. I mean, he's 85, so not
right.
Morbid, but he's 85. So if we're talking 3 years from now, there's no guarantees of anything as far as him, still being around to be involved. But as far as I know, he's still very highly motivated to buy the team. And I think, besides the stuff that just to give people a little bit of as brief of an overview as I can, ever since Paul Allen died in 2018. His sister Jody has been in charge of his trust, and one of the terms of the trust is that all of his assets have to be sold at some point, and the proceeds of that have to go to charity. And what I've been told and kind of heard and been able to gather is that she wants to hold off on selling the team in order to, cash in on the new TV deal and cash in on the expansion fees that are coming towards the end of the decade, because that's money that she would get to keep as opposed to the sale of the team, which would go, the proceeds of that would go to charity. So that's kind of the motivation there, whereas Phil Knight wants to get the deal done. And I think because of some of the stories that have come out in the last year, there was one in the New York Post last year, there was one in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago, that clearly were kind of planted by Phil Knight as a way to put public pressure on her to sell. I think because of that, she is a little bit more motivated to not sell to Phil Knight because she feels like he's trying to bully her into selling the team to him. So I don't think there hasn't really been any movement on anything since that Wall Street Journal story came out a couple of weeks ago. So I don't think there's anything new there. But the only thing we know is that at some point in the future, the team has to be sold by terms of the trust. I don't think there's a hard timeline on it.
That's just relevant both because of what's the current timeline of the Blazers and with Dame, and also across the country you see what's going down with Charlotte and Michael Jordan, and he's selling now versus hanging on for a couple years. So that's another factor maybe Joe Cronin and the Trailblazers have to factor in. Probably not just yet, but it's definitely on their radar.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I don't know how much input into roster decisions ownership is going to have. I haven't heard anything that would make me think that it's anybody but Joe making the final call on this stuff. But I'm sure ownership would not love the idea of trading Damian Lillard and not having anything that's really going to sell tickets. And then the other thing is, I understand that in a lot of cases, the job security preserving move for a general manager would be to just trade your star player, get a bunch of draft picks and young players and say, hey, you can't fire me for 5 years because I have to rebuild the team. Because of the sales situation being up in the air, I don't know if Joe Cronin is really in that same spot where he could do that even if he wanted to. Because, if a new owner comes in and he, had just traded Damian Lillard and you're at the beginning of a rebuild, the new owner had nothing to do with hiring you as a general manager, so there's no reason that owner has any real incentive to keep you around. But if the team is, if you're able to get something big done and you're still building around Dame, then they're probably just going to let you keep going for a while. Like James Jones still has his job after Matt Ishbia took over because he's still, he's not in the beginning stage of a rebuild. I think if they were still, as a franchise, the Suns, where they were 5 or 6 years ago before they, went on this run that they're on now, and a new owner came in, whoever their general manager is would have probably been out of there pretty quickly.
Sean, how much does Charlotte dictate the proceedings of this trade dance that might happen between picks 2 and 3 and what Portland might do?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, there are some teams that really want Scoot Henderson. There are some teams that really want Brandon Miller. And I mean, it's a little bit of a Venn diagram of which of those teams want which guy and which of those teams have what Portland might want. The one that has been, talked about a lot that I think is, very real as far as a possibility is New Orleans. It's very well known that they want Scoot Henderson, and that it's there's depending on what you want to believe, I think it's at least a decent possibility that they're open to discussing something involving Zion Williamson if that means that's what they get. So if Charlotte takes Scoot at 2, that's not a possibility anymore for Portland. That's just kind of that's the way it goes. It sounds right now, just based on everything that's been out there, everything I've heard, it sounds right now like Charlotte is leaning towards taking Brandon Miller. But you guys remember a year ago, Everybody thought that it was a lock that Jabari Smith was going to go number 1, and then like 12 hours before the draft, the betting line flipped suddenly, and now everybody thinks Paolo Banchero is going to go number 1. So I don't want to completely assume we know what Charlotte is going to do until they actually make it official tomorrow night, but everything that is out there right now is seeming like it's going to strongly indicate that Charlotte is going Brandon Miller. And then if that is the case, then, Portland's going to have a decision to make, especially, Scoot Henderson, a lot of teams think is the second best player in the draft after Victor Wembanyama. So you take him and you have a ton of, you have a very talented prospect who plays the same position as Damian Lillard. How's that going to work? And then, so do you, try to make that work? Does that mean you trade Dame? Do you, some of these teams that want Scoot Henderson, can you get like a Zion or a Mikal Bridges or, Pascal Siakam or somebody like that? Like, do you decide that's worth it? Like, there's a lot of different ways they can go.
I'm glad you brought up the betting lines last year because it was almost hilarious how I think through just everybody repeating the same info, we thought, Jabari, and then all of a sudden, hours before the draft, it flipped to Boncaro. I don't think Charlotte knows what it's doing. I think it's completely torn in the new ownership situation we saw today where Michael Jordan said he will be, or Mitch Kupchak said MJ will be making the pick. Well, he doesn't even have majority ownership moving forward. So that's interesting to me in all this. And that's why so much of this, Sean, I wanted to have you on because there's Charlotte and then there's Portland, and I could see both franchises doing making seismic changes to what they're doing. And I guess I'll leave you with this, with Zion. If you are Portland, and that is possible, how risk adverse should they be? Is this something they should be willing to take on purely just to make Dame happy? And along the same lines as you want to buy into what could be possible with Zion in a new situation?
You'd have to see the medicals, I think, would be the key. Like by that I mean, you look at somebody like Kawhi Leonard, where he has a degenerative knee condition that is just always going to be monitored during his career, and it's a chronic thing that's never going to go away and never going to get better, and that's why he can only play 40 or 50 games a year. If something like that were to come up with Zion, if they were to do their due diligence and gather the medical records and stuff, and there was something like that there, then I think it wouldn't be a good idea to do it. But if these injuries that he's had, they decided that they aren't related, and it's just, he's had some lower body injuries, and if he could just lose some weight and get in better shape, and then this stuff will go away and he'll be fine. If that's what they come back with, yeah, I'd take the swing because every time he's been healthy, he's been a top 5 player in the league. And the idea of him and Dame together is, if you want to talk about upside, that's the highest upside move that there is on the board. So if the medicals came back okay, yeah, I'd do it.
Yeah. Good stuff, Sean. I know you'll be busy the next 30-some hours, so appreciate you taking some time here.
Good to talk to you, man.
That's Sean Highkin, rosegardenreport.com. Like me, he's kind of branched out and doing his own thing, but he's really the only beat writer Portland has. They've made a lot of changes, and so I wanted to have him on to discuss all of that. And with Zion, man, Jimmy, that's a big wild card in all this. If you're a team, are you even wanting to buy in on that? I think I do acknowledge for the Pelicans and for Zion, I think it's best to kind of part ways, to move on. You can kind of feel from afar change is needed from both sides.
I mean, look, there's two ways to look at this, right? On the one hand, Zion has had well-documented injury history. I agree with what Sean mentioned. I need the medicals to know what it is. I need a clear analysis of what you're dealing with if you're trading him as a franchise. On the other hand, and I don't think necessarily that Zion has been playing the long con on purpose, but he has his big deal now. This is the second consecutive big-name star that has been drafted by the Pelicans that has ended in disgruntled manners. Granted, the one previous was another worldly talent that actually delivered on the hype in Anthony Davis. So I get it.
Yes.
I know there's a gap there. So I say yes, I would gladly take the swing on Zion Williamson if I'm a franchise. But I say that with hesitancy of I don't really know what the medicals are.
Right.
Everybody points to, he's overweight every year and that's why he gets hurt. Okay, is that really it, or is it a chronic condition? Like that's something I would need more clarification for before I'd be willing to go and get him.
Potentially got some news here.
Go ahead.
Per Shams Charania, Celtics and Wizards are in talks of Kristaps Porzingis opting in a trade deal.
Ooh. I really thought it was going to be a red score. I'm disappointed in you, but I'm proud of you for the NBA nugget there. Way to support the show in a way that didn't just solely focus on your interest. I'm proud of you.
The Wizards are a team, I mean, it's obvious because they already made the one big deal with the Phoenix Suns, but I really liked what Ted Leonsis, the owner of the Wizards, has done with getting new management in there. Michael Winger is brilliant. He was with OKC. He was one of them that spearheaded the deal, by the way, guys, to get Paul George here. He was deep in those talks, sent, of course, Victor Oladipo and Sabonis, and then Michael Winger went out to the Clippers, and now is the lead guy with the Wizards. You know they were going to make a change. They were just too stagnant. They were every single year like the 9th seed, the 10th seed, which is the worst. And so they've already moved on from Bradley Beal, even though it's 2 years too late. And now to work a deal for Kristaps Porzingis, you're going to lose Kyle Kuzma in free agency here. They are undergoing now the first year of a rebuild, several years overdue. But Porzingis, depending on...
He quietly had a really good year last year. Like that,
he absolutely did.
That makes sense to me. If you're Boston and you're trying to add another...
I'd be curious what they'd give up. I would assume at least one guard. The guy that comes to mind is Marcus Smart.
Or Derek White.
See, I would stick with Derek White.
I would too. I was just mentioning another name.
Just keep sending the Derek White game winner highlights to the Wizards, and
they got a lot of overlap there. Yeah, it got to the point where Marcus Smart hurt them every time he was out there, and they needed more Derek White, especially in crunch time there. They've got an overlap in the point guard spot in that backcourt. I could see them moving on from a guy there. Right, and that's it. It's those three. I think you keep two of them, ideally. If you're the Wizards, you have no interest in Brogdon, a guy that's 30 with injuries and things like that. I think you would prefer Derek White. Celtics would prefer, I think, to move on from Marcus Smart. That has some intrigue. I'd be curious what it would look like from a salary cap standpoint and who exactly and what exactly they'd give up. Maybe a first, Marcus Smart, and something else. You'd have to make it a little bit more intriguing because Porzingis does have some value. Yet at the same time, keep in mind, as you're undergoing a rebuild, what do you like? Cap space and assets. So that might be enough, much like the Phoenix Suns deal.
Especially with how tough things are going to get for teams that are top-heavy.
Yeah, if the Wizards are able to clear some cap space in all of this and get a pick or two and maybe a ready player to at least help them field a team, that makes it to be an interesting potential. But sometimes these talks, especially with the Pacers, but anytime there's public talks before anything goes down, I tend to believe they don't happen and someone wanted them out there for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, we know the gamesmanship of front offices. That's a tale as old as time. The biggest takeaway from Sean's conversation, and I don't know whether to feel bad for Damian Lillard or not, because, again, he's one of my favorite players in the league. Mm-hmm. He's gotten his money. Let's be realistic, though. Like, look, Eddie can cut this. We could save it for 3 years down the line, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Barring something truly seismic, they're not winning a championship while Damian Lillard is on this contract. It's not going to happen. The extension hasn't even kicked in yet, and while Dame is elite, he's going to continue to play at this high level into his late 30s. Like, that's really what you're banking on if you're Portland. I know you want to do right by your star, but they are much more realistically in line with a team that is building 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Wizards will be than they are a contender in the Western Conference, a legitimate contender, not just a seed holder in the Western Conference. I would deal him, man. Like, I don't know what the market is, but I know there'd be teams interested in him. I would press the reset button.
Loyalty thing. Yeah, I get it. Think about here, to make it, back here. If Pacers were in year 13 of Reggie Miller and weren't going anywhere like they were in the mid-90s, I guess that would have been 10 years into his deal.
Yeah.
But
if you fast forward that to 13 years, you're still in a real contending window. Like, Portland's never been that. They've had iconic moments, a couple nice game winners,
several
from Dame
times. Yep.
Yeah, plenty of pointing to the wristwatch. Like, it's been great. There's not been a legit window of true contention. Even the 1 year they got to the conference finals, if I'm not mistaken, they were snuffed out by the Warriors, like in 5 games.
The complete roster has just not been good enough.
And so, like, I get it. I admire Dame's loyalty. But here's my issue. Even if there's a great relationship within that front office, if it was a superstar here with the Pacers and they were wanting to stay here long term, I'm not okay with the public frustration when you're getting your money, you're getting your long-term deal that you wanted here, but the timelines don't add up. If you know what this franchise is, regardless of change of general managers, you know what the Trailblazers are. Why continue to sign up long-term but then be mad when they're not on a window that you're at? And mad in the sense you want out, by the way, not to ruin relationships.
Dame's making $45 million next year. A player
58
option, it
estimate
looks like
in
49.
When the extension kicks in, 58 and 25, 26, and 63 with a player option that you're absolutely going to opt into at 36 years old.
Correct. Yeah. By the way, Bradley Beal's got a player option.
His contract's
Breaking
disgusting.
news. Yeah, he's going to opt into that in about 4 years.
It's what, 50 mil, right?
Yeah.
He's not ready to wait for that opt-in.
No need to put a source on that. I think we all know what's happening there in about 4 years with that deal. But it's so difficult. This is where you try to remove yourself from the emotional equation, from the relationships equation if you're the front office with Portland. But it's also Portland. It's not LA. It's not Miami. It's not a destination. That in large part is why it's been so tough. And it's really been a challenge for them to get pieces to go along with them. They've tried. They made a couple of trades. I'd agree. As much as I love seeing player loyalty and vice versa, because I think they've both shown it. It kind of reminds me of the Pacers a couple of years ago where it's just spoiled milk. And it's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Can you restart this machine and provide some intrigue there? And I think if you ask Pacer fans from where they felt a couple of years ago, where Malcolm Brogdon signs an extension in the fall. Remember that one?
Yeah, unfortunately.
And we're going to run it back. Let's see what Domantas Sabonis can do and Miles Turner. This is the year they figured it out.
Regrettably, I do remember that, yeah.
Yeah. More injuries happen, and in turn, they decided, we've seen enough. We just got blown out by the Charlotte Hornets at home, gave up a franchise record. I think it was 154 points in January. Yeah, it's time to start. And last year, attendance was up. Interest was up. Now, not in the end of the season when they were wanting here to have a better pick, and rightfully so. But you could feel fans cared again. They were relevant again, at least locally to an extent, not nationally. And we'll see here moving forward. We're going to take a break here. It's the Fan Midday Show. Talk more about the Pacers, the deal they agreed to with the Denver Nuggets, and who's in play for the Pacers in the draft tomorrow night. All that and more as we wrap up this hour on the Fan Midday Show here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind.
Back with you for the final half hour of the Midday Show. JMV will be taking over here at 3 p.m. With Jimmy Cook, I'm Scott Agnes. Did get some clarity for certain during the break that it is not Denver's pick in it. So to rehash what the Pacers have agreed to, Jimmy, here is a deal with the Denver Nuggets. The Pacers will be giving up two of their picks, the 5 that they had this year, right? It's pick 29 and pick 32 right there together. One is at the end of the first draft. One is at the start of the second draft. That's notable, especially from the Denver side of it. But the important thing here is this is not, as the Pacers are receiving, what the Pacers are receiving next year is a first-round pick from Denver. It is not Denver's first-round pick. And so otherwise, that would kind of seem like a lateral move. Why aren't they getting more draft assets for this?
This could be a very valuable pick.
It could. You could probably jump up another 10 spots, potentially. And more than that, you're also, as I keep reiterating, kicking the can down the road with at least one of your good first-round picks.
If it's the one from Houston, it's 1 to 4 protected. If it's Utah, it's 1 to 10 protected. Clippers and Oklahoma City, both unprotected picks. So if you're throwing a dart, you would probably say the Clippers would be the worst of those, just guessing based on where the mindset is of all those franchises. Oklahoma City continues to flounder around with all the draft picks they have and young talent. I guess you could say maybe they finally put it all together and take a leap forward this year, but Clippers would likely be the pick that you'd make, at which point you're looking at a playoff team selection. So yeah, likely anywhere from that 24 to 20, 19 to 24 range or 17 to 24 range, depending on where the Clippers would in theory be next year. Again, that's a huge leap because you're having to evaluate what the Clippers, who view themselves as a contender, will do next season. But the other 3 options, potentially having ace in the holes, or if the Clippers once again have injury struggles and, I don't know, miss out on the playoffs, it could be a very valuable pick and is less head scratching with that new wrinkle.
Yeah. There's a lot to this. I will say it's very complicated. Texting, talking, and trying to share more info as it becomes available. But now that we've learned this and this stipulation, that it is not the Denver Nuggets pick, which presumably being one of the best teams in the league and coming off a title, they'd probably be 28, 29, 30. Now you're looking with a better opportunity here. So now I grade this, because knowing that fact, I feel much better about this situation and what they were able to accomplish. And they're not done yet. No way they are, Jimmy. I can't see it.
I mean, 4 selections in tomorrow night's draft would, again, just surprise me. It does, though, it does not change my view of this move, which is that they didn't view or weren't getting the feedback they wanted from the rest of the league, that their range of picks, 26 and 29, were as coveted as they thought to try to get up with just those 2 picks to a 15 to 20 type of range. The fact that they were willing to move on with the worst of their final 2 first-round picks and the 29th pick, the fact they were willing to move that in a separate deal for a pick next year tells me that the theorized package we had of, oh, hey, move 26, 29 and get up to that 15 to 20 range either wasn't viable or the cost would have been more than just those 2 picks to move up, and that wasn't something the Pacers wanted to do.
Or maybe just the entire time they were looking to kick the can down the road, as Scott has said. Maybe they were trying to go that route. That way, maybe they like somebody already in the 24 draft. If they've already looked that far out, they can, package whatever their pick falls in with that pick and then move up a little bit, get another piece to help this young roster. I don't know.
I mean, it very well could be. That's a valid angle. I would just like to think that with the emphasis on, and not say you can't get good players when you're a playoff team, you see it all the time. I would like to think that their emphasis is still on there's high value in this year's draft. We would like to, in theory, get back up into the first round. That seems less likely for me unless players are involved in a move to move up in the draft. And I don't necessarily think that would be in the cards. If I'm the Pacers and I'm moving any personnel with picks, I would think that is to go get a veteran versus to move up to, say, middle of the first round.
Just gives them more optionality next season.
Sure. Yes. Love it. Gotta love it.
I'm just most interested in the 7th pick and the route in which they take here because, I mean, For example, what if one of the Thompson twins is available unexpectedly there at 7? Do you
Nassar would be less so than a man, right? I mean,
correct. Yeah, he's more of a man is more of a point guard and really of an overlap.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean for them fit-wise. I meant in terms of projections in the draft. It seems more likely that Nassar Thompson to be there versus a man, correct?
I think so, generally speaking. But the
who knows, right?
Correct.
Sure.
You hear more about Nassar in the last week, but again, I also preface, usually it's a lot of BS in the last week.
Yeah.
People tell you things for a reason.
Agents are there for a reason. Yep.
Yeah. And if you're talking to teams, you think they're really going to tell you what they believe or what they want or what their convictions tell them? No, of course not. They're going to keep that close to the vest because it only favors them to do so. But I'm still riding the Jarace Walker train here, Jimmy. How about you?
Look, I'm not against it. There's only a handful of players, and even then, I would probably see where the Pacers are going with that would perplex me. Like, for instance, if they were to take Grady Dick at 7, I would be a little confused by that evaluation. Not to say I don't think he could be a good player within this league. There's other players I like better than him. Like if Cam Whitmore was to fall there, like Jarace Walker, the more I read and see about Taylor Hendricks, the more I am convinced that it was not, like Rafael Barlowe mentioned to us earlier, it was not just a one-off thing. It was, some of it is the criticism that take place when you're a prospect from Central Florida versus being a prospect from Kentucky. Like, I understand that. But yeah, if it's Jarace Walker, the more we've talked to people about where his range is, like I didn't know the figure directly offhand, whatever, north of 34% from open looks from 3. How often do we see in the playoffs a team that relies on three-pointers so heavily, it come back to bite you when open looks aren't being knocked down? Like that's a good measurement for somebody of his role. So yeah, if it's Jarace Walker, I'm not going to be mad about it. The only way I'd be mad is if they traded back in a way that would confuse us, which doesn't seem like that's actually in the cards, or if they reached on somebody that I really don't see the immediate fit a la Grady Dick.
Yeah, I like his game and I like his skill set and what he provides. Just too soon.
Yeah.
To me, he's more of he's kind of in that range, I think, Jimmy, of Jalen Hood-Schifino, where I could see him at 10, but probably a little bit later on. Speaking of Jalen Hood-Schifino, I think his ideal spot would be something like 12 and 13, Oklahoma City and Toronto. I think those two make a lot of sense. And I've also got a lot of questions on Fieldhouse Files and even more now on Twitter about Trace Jackson Davis. Where does he go? What's an ideal landing spot for him? I will say Trace was just in Denver. That was one of his visits. I think he finished with 13 that at least I know about. He was wrapping up a couple days ago with the Clippers. I could see him go.
I think that'd be a really nice fit.
I could see him go as high as 24 to Sacramento. I know Sacramento was big fans of him. Utah, and Charlotte also makes a lot of sense. They're the team now with the most picks overall in this draft, including 27, 34, all the way down to 39. So Charlotte and Sacramento, I think, would be my 2 odds-on favorite for him.
We make a big deal, almost to a fault at times in today's NBA, that big men or bigger-sized players are not able to have a functionality in the league without being able to shoot from beyond the arc. This isn't what Trace wants out of his career, and I'm not saying that he's married to this, but even if his tenure in the NBA is a role player, not a true starter, but a role player that is making some type of contribution to the team, there are plenty of big men around the league where you can point to and realize that that's what they're there for. They know their role. They've accepted it. Again, I know Trace Jackson Davis wants to be a star in this league, and I think he very well could be, but let's say the three-point concerns are real, and he doesn't have a legitimate shot in the NBA from beyond the arc. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a legitimate shot in the NBA as a player. Denver would be a very interesting fit because there'd be less reliance on him to be a knockdown shooter as much as there would to be a complementary piece at first with your second unit and utilizing in similar ways they were able to do with other big bodies when they needed to sub out Nikola Jokic. So that would be a very interesting fit for me. It needs to be a spot, though, where he's not put in a situation where, okay, we need you to go down and knock 2, 3, 4 3-pointers a game in the first half of the season. It needs to be a good developmental spot for him as a big man, even though he's not necessarily that by the traditional sense.
Completely agree.
There's a home for him. It's just it's all about where the best fit is.
There's so many ways in which I think he can impact a game that if you're just watching him one time,
the passing alone.
Yeah, the patching. And I think it's a little bit of an exaggeration to call him he's able to be a central hub of an offense, much like I did with Sabonis. Sometimes, like you'll see with Draymond, those are two comparisons he's used in talking with media about what his game could be similar to. Of course, not replicas or anything like that, but you're trying to project what he can look like at that next level. And center of the floor, free throw line, posting up, grabbing rebound, and that's the underrated part. I think a lot of these draft nicks that I've read are not talking enough about, Jimmy, are his defensive versatility, ability to block shots and go up and get boards, and a lot of those are just effort plays. And you know, with Trace, and this is part of his game that's really evolved over the last couple of years. He admittedly was a little bit lazy, was not giving his best his first year or two at IU. He even said that, and then he made a huge jump the last couple of years, especially this past year, where arguably could have been Big Ten National Player of the Year, one of the best players in the country as a 4-year guy at IU. And now, finally, I think 3 years later than all of us expected, he was able to test the waters. He was able to go all in and do these pre-draft workouts with teams, and he's helped his case. And I thought that would absolutely be the situation. He would look better when he got in front of executives, went through these 3-on-3 workouts, had lunch with executives, and really was able to make an impression on him. And the other thing I do highlight about his game in the last couple of years, he's been playing more within an NBA style. Less so space and pace that he'll be able to increase coming up with the NBA. But with Mike Woodson, he even joked at the Combine, which I thought was great. He was like, I was tuned into a Knicks game, and they were running one of our out-of-bounds plays. Well, of course, Mike Woodson coming from New York. You are giddy over there, smiling. Is this
Oh, yeah, the Reds
Eddie's
took the 2-run homer on the bottom of the 5th inning.
You would have thought the Pacers just made a deal based on Jimmy's smile.
Well, I saw the fist bump from Eddie and the glee, and you saw the big font from Ballard, 2-run go-ahead home run, and bottom of the 8th, 5-3 Reds.
Ellie De La Cruz, man. Just gets it started. A little blue pit, turns into a double, then Jake Fraley 2-run bomb.
I am most fascinated now, though, outside of 7, with the idea of a selection actually being made with the 26th pick. Because, again, I thought perhaps they might be in a window with 26 and 29 to move up to go get, I'm just going to throw out names that would have potentially been there. At that point, maybe you're looking at more realistic range of 14 to 20 of Grady Dick. Gianotto Chifino's in that range. Chris Murray's in that range. The idea now that they're at 26, now you're looking at Trace Jackson Davis is there in that range. Jaime Jaquez is there in that range. Mm-hmm. The likelihood of them actually making that selection, okay, now we can really evaluate the idea of them making it versus trying to use it as an asset to move up. And that's rather intriguing to me because there is a clear need at wing, but if you find somebody with an upside at the middle to back end portion of this draft, does that change your evaluation at all at 7 of what you're wanting to bring in? But again, so much of that is dictated by what does Charlotte and Portland do from a movement standpoint, because if trades get involved, scratch out that Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson are guaranteed to go in the order they're projected right now. And that could change a lot with the Pacers being right there at 7 and who falls to them.
Let's discuss more of that 26th pick and who might be in play there, who potentially we'd like to see. Rehash also Pacers getting together with the Denver Nuggets on a deal that will push back one of their picks this year and move a pick from this year's first to next year. And it's a little bit better than originally reported. So we'll update you on that and a lot more here on 107.5 and 93.5 The Fan.
Luxair
Fan.
Back for the final time here on the Fan Midday Show. Thanks for joining us and being with us throughout. Jimmy, you got to love when actual news breaks during the show, and I think our initial discussion on it then changed once we learned a little bit more about the first-round pick that will be coming to the Pacers. If you're just joining us, the Pacers and the Denver Nuggets agreeing on a deal that will send the Pacers' 29 pick and 32 this year to Denver. So it's allowing Denver, a win-now team coming off a championship, to add to that right now. And for the Pacers, who had 5 picks coming in, it moves on from those 2 picks. They get a first-round pick next year. It is not the Denver's pick. I'm told Denver's pick is not included in this deal, and that is important. Instead, it is the least favorable of teams that none of which I think are expected to be contenders, just being relevant. Houston, they're rebuilding. OKC, probably an early teen. Utah, and LAC, and the Clippers. And I would guess right now that would be the Clippers deal, but who knows what they ultimately end up doing. But they're going to want to be relevant because they're getting a new venue. They're getting their own venue right now that's being built out in Los Angeles. So that becomes really interesting. Shams now saying the Wizards, Celtics, Clippers engaged in a deal that could get interesting. Usually these 3-team deals don't work out, especially if they get public beforehand. But it centers around Kristaps Porzingis going to Boston, Marcus Morris and draft comp to Washington, and Malcolm Brogdon potentially to the Clippers. They needed a point guard, and so also the next thing that I think about here is that means either, one, the Clippers know they can't get Chris Paul, or they like Malcolm Brogdon, and he will be able to potentially contribute there. There's a trickle-down effect to every one of these deals that potentially happen.
Just to clarify, that was Marcus Smart in that move?
Marcus Morris.
Marcus Morris, okay. Because we look at the cap numbers here, they have to clear $30 million, the Celtics do. At least that's the thought if they're going to bring in somebody like Kristaps Porzingis. And you look at what they'll be paying next year. Brogdon's going to make $22 million. Marcus Smart's going to make $18 million, sure. $17 million for Derek White, and that's just going off of the likely untouchables, which is their Tatum-Brown tandem. That's not likely going anywhere, even though there were rumblings after the season with how things went down for the Celtics. Is it time to move on from Brown? But yeah, you're looking at cap numbers, and those are the 3 that come to mind just for the sake of it. Robert Williams, $11 million, and Al Horford, $10 million. So they have pieces they could move. And again, quietly, that was a very nice season last year for Kristaps Porzingis with the role that he would take on within Boston. I would be very fascinated to see what that looks like.
And another wing. Now he's a bigger wing, really a 4, maybe a 5. But Shams does add the size are working through details, and potentially Porzingis' $36 million player option. And maybe do you agree to a long-term deal and he takes less this first year, right? You talk about teams and agents working ways to make it satisfactory to both sides.
It's only 27. That's that.
Yeah.
For some reason,
I'd be good with him for 3 more years.
That's fine. Like I for some reason, with how it feels like he's been in the league forever, but he has to an extent. 8 years, 2015.
Because he's been moved around a few times.
He has. He's had a couple different homes in New York and Dallas and Washington now. But yeah, I mean, if he's able to have the type of stability that he showed last year, that's an addition, no doubt, for what Boston wants to do within this window they're at.
Before we wrap up and make some thoughts on the draft, let's get to your special time, Jimmy. It's that time of the day.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not an athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day, we're going to take the Cleveland Guardians straight up because it burned us yesterday this time against the Oakland Athletics. They did win that game, but did not cover the 1.5 bet that Eddie loves so much. It is high juice you're giving up there, minus 180. That's kind of the trend here today. Also going to take the Los Angeles Angels over the money line, I beg your pardon, against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Shohei Ohtani on the mound. And Eddie's right. Luis Castillo, former Red, on the bump for the Seattle Mariners. Might not end well for the Yankees, but I do think they go over 2.5 total runs. We look to bounce back after a 1-2 performance yesterday, 2-4 on the week. Eddie, anything you have in store tonight?
Yep, I'm going in that Dodgers-Angels game. First 5, give me the -0.5 a run for the Angels, minus 122. I think they'll be able to get to Michael Grove early. He has been treacherous so far for that Dodgers starting rotation. And plus, their offense has honestly not been great as of late. All they really have is Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts. And I'm looking in that Mariners-Yankees game, Jay Cook.
Uh-oh.
Going -1.5 for the Seattle Mariners. I think it's a nice little BP day against Johnny Burrito.
That's disrespectful.
Johnny batting practice, as I call him. Get some nice plus odds. +106 is what I've got it at. So that's what I'm rolling with. +112 just moved up for me.
We'll see how that plays. Scott, this is the last time we'll talk to you before Monday. So I guess two-part question. One, I know you've made it pretty clear you'd be fine if Jarris Walker is the selection by the Pacers. Is that who you'd like to see them take? And secondly, is the move, the subsequent trade we think is going to happen, is it a trade that involves picks, or is it a trade that brings in that veteran player that they're looking for, that key contributor to address the wing need?
I think the hope is the latter there. We just don't know for certain if the opposing teams are making those players available. At that said, I would be very interested if they're able to move up into the mid-teens for their second selection. That would also interest me. I don't think they will have enough, though, with pick 26 and 40 and even 55. You'd probably have to include a player, almost certainly, a Chris Duarte, Isaiah Jackson, for example. So Jarris Walker, I think he would be my pick if the draft unfolds kind of as we expected. And then there's a group of probably 7 guys that you go later on at 26 if they make that draft pick. I really like Max Prosper from Marquette, to be sure. Colby Jones. There's a lot of different guys, all of whom the Pacers brought in that I think they'd be content with. How about you?
Yeah, I'm in that same boat. Would be totally fine if they end up with Jarris Walker. He's Scott Agnes. I'm Jimmy Cook. He'll be back in on Monday. Thanks to Danny Lopez, Rafael Barlowe, and Sean Highkin. Riot with JMV is next. Keep it right here.